ba insulto sa iyo, Mr. President? Ito ba insulto sa ating institusyon sapagkat ang bawat isa na nagluklok sa atin bilang senador ng Republika ng Pilipinas, nung tayo po ay binoto bilang kinatawan nila as national leaders, Mr. President. Not as district representatives, not as party list representatives, but national leaders. Is this an insult, Mr. President? Is this disenfranchisement, Mr. President? Disenfranchisement of the very sacred right of every Filipino, the right to suffrage, Mr. President. I would like to assure our Filipino people that the Senate, as the last bastion of democracy, always will support the people's clamor to institute reforms, whether this would be crafting laws or amending the Constitution itself. The Senate exists because of the people, and we will continue to push for the uplifting of the life of every Filipino. In the event that our people would come to truly believe that it is only through their own efforts that they can rewrite the letters of the Constitution to a form and content that they think embodies their ideals, I am sure that the Senate will be the first to support. However, the Senate will also be the first to condemn if the right to people's initiative is being bastardized by enterprising politicians. The Senate will not allow and will therefore condemn any form of threat, coercion, or bribery that compromises the future of our country and our people.
Julia, gusto ko lamang pong sundan ang napakagandang talumpati ni Senator Bato de la Rosa. Ganun din po ang iminungkahi at ibinato ng ating pinunong mayorya patungkol po sa People's Initiative. Bilang ako po ay chairman ng Committee ng Amendments and Revision, nais ko pong ipaalam sa inyo, Ginoong Pangulo, na ako po mismo ay may sarili ding People's Initiative. Iyan po ay aking isinusulong at nais ko pong ipaalam sa lahat na wala pong sa konstitusyon natin, Article 70, napakaliwanag, na meron po talagang tatlong moda. At yan ng Constitutional Assembly, CONCON, at People's Initiative. Ang nais ko lamang pong linawin, mahal na Ginoong Pangulo, na wala pong masama sa People's Initiative. Wala. Yan po ay kasama sa konstitusyon at yan po ay pinalalakas. Katulad po ng sinabi ni Senator Bato de la Rosa, ito po ay esensya ng ating demokrasya. Ang nagkakaroon lamang po ng hindi naaayon sa saligang batas na umiiral sa atin ngayon ng 1987 Constitution, malinaw po doon sa Article 6 din ang legislative body, ang paghihiwalay ng Senado at ng House of Representatives. Ang magkahiwalay na kapangyarihan, lalong-lalo na sa tinatawag nating voting powers. Nagkaroon lamang po tayo ng pagkakataon na maging suliranin yung voting sapagkat doon sa Article 17, hindi malinaw na naisulat. Pero doon sa Article 6, Section 21, kung hindi po ako nagkakamali, in time of war, malinaw po doon na ang Senado at ang House ay meron silang magkasamang pagpupulong at sila ay boboto separately. Napakalinaw po nun. Hindi lang po natin maintindihan kung bakit nagkaroon ng People's Initiative na ipinipilit ang voting jointly. Ang pag-uusapan natin ay saligang batas. Ito po ay talagang kailangan po natin pag-usapan ng mahaba, kasama po ang malaking kapulungan, ang House. Hindi po ito para po sa akin pong ibinigay niyong komite. Pinag-aralan ko po ito, ang ating konstitusyon. Ito pong voting jointly ay lumalabag sa artikulo ng legislative body sapagkat meron pong paghihiwalay ng kapangyarihan. At diyan pong kapangyarihan na yung voting, kasama po yan. At malinaw sa ating konstitusyon. Kaya mahal na Ginoong Pangulo, hayaan niyo po akong makapagpasalamat sa bumubuo ng ating Senado at inyo pong ipinaglalaban yung ating kapangyarihan na magkaroon ng voting separately. Sapagkat ito po ang sinasabi ng 1987 Constitution. At ang People's Initiative po ay ang pwede lang po natin gawin lamang ay amendment. Hindi po tayo pwedeng mag-revision ng konstitusyon na gagamitin ang People's Initiative. Sapagkat piecemeal lang ang pwede natin gawin. Amendment lang, hindi po revision. Kaya po sana, maging malinaw po ito sa ating taong bayan na ang ating pong winawaksi dito, ngayon, sa ating bulwagan ng Senado, ay yung sinasabing pagtatanggal ng kapangyarihan sa Senado. Yun po ay talagang parang isinawalang bahala na natin ang saligang batas. Kailangan po tindigan natin ang saligang batas sapagkat tayo po ay nanumpa sa harap ng saligang batas. At yun lamang po, mahal na Pangulo, maraming salamat po. Mabuhay ang Senado.
Maraming salamat, Senator Robin Hood Padilla. Ako'y humanganga din po sa inyo. Alam ko, ang inyong adhikain, advocacy, is to amend the charter to improve the constitution ng ating bansa. At pumirma po kayo dito dahil sa puntong iyon na binanggit mo, na dahil ayaw po makapon ng Senado, ayaw nyo pong walang saysay ang Senado dito sa usaping charter change. Kaya mabuhay po kayo, Senator. Marami po sa amin ay naniniwala din po sa inyo na dapat meron tayong mga kailangan baguhin, pero sa tamang paraan. Maraming salamat. Majority Floor Leader.
Yes, Mr. President. Next to make a manifestation is our Minority Leader, Senator Coco Pimentel. I move that he be recognized.
Our distinguished Minority Floor Leader.
Proceed with the privileged speech and recognize our distinguished colleague, the gentle... Oh, Mr. President, I'm sorry. Before we do that, may I just move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2449. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
This juncture, Mr. President, I move that we proceed with the privileged speech and recognize the distinguished gentleman from Isabela and Davao, no other than our idol, Senator Raffy Tulfo, to deliver his privileged speech.
Our
So moved,
distinguished
Mr. President.
colleague, Senator Raffy Tulfo, is recognized, sir.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues. Gusto ko po ihain sa inyo ngayong araw na ito ang spaghetti. Hindi po ito yung spaghetti na ikinakain natin sa handaan o yung kantang spaghetti. Sa halip, ito pong spaghetti na ito ay matuturing kong panganib at perwisyo sa ating mga kababayan. I present to you spaghetti wires and cables. My staff went around the metro to take photos of these entangled and voluminous wires and cables. And it was very easy to find them. Alam ko, pamilyar po tayong lahat sa mga ito. Ang sakit po sa mga mata. My attention was recently called regarding these spaghetti wires when several complainants came to my program last Friday because they got into an accident due to some hanging wires along EDSA. Panoorin po natin. Mr. President,
Dito nakakabli ng kawad po.
oh, kaya may ano ka sa
Opo,
liig,
sir.
bandage.
Kaya po yung time na yun, sir, binitawan ko na po yung motor ko, hindi ko na po alam kung anong nangyari sa amin. Sa gitna po ng kalsada, sir. Buti lang po yung mga ibang motorcycle rider na tumulong po sa amin. Kasi kung may kasunod pong nangyari sa aming pagkatumba, baka nasagasaan na po kami noon.
Pati si ma'am.
Opo.
Ang ulo ko
Sa ma'am,
sir, ang
Tulfo.
tumama. Tapos yung ipin ko.
We already contacted Philippine Global Communications Incorporated through their customer service representative po. We informed po na mayroon pong ganong insidente nangyari and also we emailed the police report po.
Ano pong sagot nila, Corporal?
Ang sabi po nung nakausap natin na si Mika po ay na-forward na daw po nila yung police report doon po sa kanilang legal.
Kausapin ko yung chairman ng MMDA. Of course, responsable ng may-ari ng kable. Pero dapat bilang sila yung namamahala dyan sa mga kalye, sa EDSA, yung MMDA dapat nakita nila na may mga nakabalanda ng kable, tinawagan nila yung Philippine Global para ipaayos.
Sir, maidagdag ko lamang po. Nung gabi po na yun, 4 na sunod-sunod po yung nadisgrasya.
4?
4 po. Maliban pa po sa kanila, may mga nauna po. Opo, siya po yung isa sa mga biktima. Bali, 12 midnight po. Alas 1:30 po ng umaga. At meron pa rin pong nabasagan po ng windshield.
Mr. President, 4 incidents involving just that particular area in EDSA, and yet, kailangan pa po nila pumunta sa aking programa para magsumbong. Ito pong mga taga-Philippine Global Communications Incorporated na nagmamayari ng mga kabling yan nung nilapitan po ng mga naberya nila. Ano ang mga sinabi? Magsumiti raw ng pictures at video para ma-refer sa kanilang legal at pag-aaralan. Pagkatapos po noon, aming tinawagan ng MMDA. Ang sagot lang sa amin ng magaling na MMDA, hindi daw nila jurisdiction yung nangyari. Kawawang mga nilalang. Mga walang malay na naghanap buhay lang at namamalengke sana ay muntik pang mabawian ng buhay. At ito mga may kasalanang walang urgency at malasakit sa mga tao. Ibabato pa sa legal. At ang MMDA na sana ay ang sangay ng gobyerno na maaaring nakagawa ng paraan upang mapigilan ang mga aksidente sa pamagitan ng pagtawag ng atensyon nitong Philippine Global Communications ay umiiwas sa kanilang responsibilidad. Dahil sa pangyayaring ito, aking pong pinatingnan ang estado ng mga kable sa ating mga kapaligiran. Mr. President, just last August 2023, dahil sa mga nag-ipon-ipon na kable sa mga poste ng kuryente sa Binondo, sa tabi mismo ng Binondo Church, 4 na posteng bumagsak dahil sa bigat. Nabagsakan po ang ilang mga sasakyan. Naputol ang kuryente at ibang telco services. Kasamang internet doon sa area na yun. Pagkatapos po, sinarang kalye upang maayos ang mga bumagsak na poste kaya nagdulot ng traffic. Mr. President, ito po mga spaghetti wires ang nagdudulot ng napakaraming problema para sa ating bayan. Number 1, just like in the case that was brought to me, it is a risk to life and limb. It poses real danger to our citizens. Ito lang po is enough to make this matter a national concern. It could also be a cause of terrible traffic. Kapag ito pong mga kable at mga poste bumagsak, ito po ay magdudulot ng matinding traffic. Number 3, damage to property. Just like the one in Binondo, it fell on cars parked along the street. If these wires are not maintained well, it is known to cause fire as well. Number 4, damage to heritage sites. Kung magagawin po tayo sa Intramuros, madami din po mga ganitong spaghetti wires. And if these wires damage the properties there, hindi po madaling mag-restore ng mga lugar na luma na at kung masunog halos, imposible na maibalik ito sa dati. Number 5, it is an eyesore. As mentioned earlier, tourists who visit Intramuros see how these lines hamper the beautiful sights there. Ang sakit po sa mata ng mga spaghetti wires na ito. And number 6, interrupted in electricity and telecommunications. Just like what happened in Binondo when it fell, businesses, including banks, lost their internet. What if hospitals are affected and they experience brownouts for a long period of time, especially in the middle of a surgery? Mahirap po yung ganong klaseng sitwasyon. All these possible impending danger and negative effects could be prevented if people who are responsible would just stop looking the other way and pretend that these wires do not exist. Mr. President, bakit nga ba nagkakaganito ang mga wires at kable natin? It seems that these wires are mostly from utility companies such as telecommunication, internet providers, and electricity distributors. These companies apply for permits to install these structures and attach these cables, but there seems to be nobody actively regulating them. Nobody is monitoring them, in short. Once a wire is no longer in use, they shall leave it there. And new utility providers just keep on adding and adding and adding more wires. Some would give an excuse that they cannot just remove the useless and abandoned wires because hindi naman daw sa kanila yun. So nagmumukha pong tambakan ang mga poste natin na mga kable na nagkakabulbol at wala nang pakinabang. Tapos, minsan pa po, ginagawa pa nila yung storage facility para madali silang mag-ayos. May ilang nag-iwan ng mga rolyo ng kable para kung may ayusin, nandun agad extra cables. Mr. President, who issues the permit for this construction and installation? We have the building officials issuing building permits. These are supposed to go to the city engineering office. But how come it is as if after submitting the requirements, these companies have a free hand already in whatever they hang in these poles? There should be a continuous monitoring so that the permits could be lifted when they are not compliant. Ito pong Philippine Global Communications Incorporated ay dapat ma-review ang kanilang permit to operate. They are not doing their job properly. And who knows, ilan pa mga kable nila ang nagdudulot sa mga perwisyo sa tao. Mr. President, in the case that happened to the complainants that approached me, there is a clear lack of accountability on the telcos and the government regulating agencies. We have to determine whose liability this is. LGU ba, DPWH, or the telcos, all electric distribution companies. There should be more national direction regarding these concerns. There are individuals' actions in some areas. For example, in Davao, they already installed their cables underground. Matagal na po ito pinopropose ni Architect Palafox. What is stopping us from implementing this? And while this is pending, there are some LGUs like in Cebu and Valenzuela that did a clearing drive in their area of these cables. In Pasig, they have an ordinance holding telcos and electric companies liable for failure to clear these lines. Maybe we could explore these options so that these spaghetti wires could finally be resolved and no more life could be put at risk. I believe that the Committee on Public Works under the chairmanship of Senator Buong Revilla could ably address this. And as chairman of the Committee on Energy, I will take the cudgels against the electric distribution companies. If there are adjustments that we need to make in our laws and put the responsibility on those businesses making use of these posts and cables, I know we can work on these together. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Rafi Tulfo. Session suspended.
That he be recognized, Mr. President.
Our distinguished Minority Floor Leader, Senator Pimentel, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Una sa lahat, allow me to congratulate our colleague, Senator Rafi Tulfo, for bringing this to our attention. Matagal ng problema ito at parati natin ito nakikita and we're just maybe taking it for granted. Kaya, lalo na ngayon, meron ng mga aksidenteng 4 sa isang lugar. I hope wala pong namatay, Senator Tulfo, doon sa insidente.
Fortunately, wala pa po. Okay.
Ito po, Mr. President, na meron akong bisita a few months ago, insan ko na based in the US. Dala niya yung kanyang 13-year-old son. Ang sabi nga niya sa akin, look at the black spaghetti. Sabi ko, ano yung, what is that black spaghetti? Yung term black spaghetti. The wires. Napansin ng batang laki sa Amerika na yung mga wires nga natin, buhol-buhol at nakikita niya na nagsanga-sanga, buhol-buhol, siguro walang order. Kaya ang napatawag ay black spaghetti. Ngayon, if they lead to vehicular accidents already, Mr. President, posible bang fire hazards din po ito, Mr. President? Mako-consider di ba natin mga fire hazards din ito?
Mr. President, that is precisely right. Marami na pong mga incidents in the past, yung mga kable na kabulbul sa kalye, nag-cause po ng accident like fire. May mga bahay na nasunog at meron na po mga na-electrocute, but not on this particular case that I did my privilege speech on. Marami na po. You're correct, Mr. President.
So, Mr. President, siguro matanong lang natin sa ating speaker, sa research po niya on the subject matter, masasabi na ba niyang alam na natin sino dapat ang in charge dito para ayusin itong so-called black spaghetti, Mr. President?
Mr. President, thank you very much for that question. Yeah, as a matter of fact, naka-encounter po kami ng tinatawag nating pagpapasapasahan because when we called the MMDA, because itong problema ito ay sa kalye sa Quezon City, na dapat responsibilidad ng MMDA because meron tayong batas ng MMDA ang nagme-make sure na yung safety ng mga motorista. But the MMDA said it's not our jurisdiction. Nagugas kamay po sila at itinuro po nila doon sa telco. Actually, Mr. President, wala pa tayong clear na na batas para sabihin who should be responsible dito sa mga spaghetti na nagiging salod dyan sa mga kalye. Ito ho ba ay telco in the case kung ito ay from telecommunication companies? Ito ba ay yung engineering office ng city na kung saan nandun yung spaghetti na wires? Ito ho ba ay MMDA or DPWH? Wala pa po eh. That's why sana po pag nagkaroon tayo ng hearing tungkol dito, we have to come up with something where meron tayong i-delegate na isang agency na would take the lead and be responsible sa mga problemang ito. Para kung may nangyari, sila pong sisin at wala nang iba pa.
Tama po, importante. Nagawa ko rin yung comment na yun sa isang hearing ni Senator Risa Ontiveros na napansin ko nga rito sa Pilipinas yung it seems like it's a practice not to pinpoint the ultimate person or agency or entity responsible for a certain act. Kaya if we do not do that, nangyari, turuan. nagtuturuan. So, I hope na pag na-hear na po itong subject matter na ito, ang resulta talaga natin, we can come up with a clear policy na sana ang resulta ay hindi shared power. Pag shared power patay, wala na naman mangyari. Parang interagency na naman po yan ng mga shared power. We must have, we must lodge the responsibility to a very specific agency, entity, or person, Mr. President.
I agree with you, Mr. President. To give an example, this was a few months ago. Meron po na aksidente na isang bata sa isang probinsya. He got electrocuted dahil yung wire, umuulan po yun, nakalawit-lawit sa may kalsada, namatay po siya. Ngayon, hindi po inaako nung may-ari ng electric company kasi sabi niya, dapat daw yung LGU, dapat daw monitor ng LGU na may sakop ng lugar. Sabi naman ng LGU, hindi naman kami dapat yan, dapat yung police kasi naisumbong na raw yan. So lahat silang tuturuan.
Tuturuan, opo. Sige po, kung nangyari sa Amerika to, I think yung aggrieved party would have sued the local government. Ganun na mangyari. So, dito, although of course the local governments can be sued, dito yata ang local government ng Taal, Taal Batangas, tanungan natin kung tama ba yung theory ko. The local government can be sued. And unfortunately, kung manalo yata ng monetary claim yung plaintiff, yung execution ng problema, paano naman niya ma-execute? So maybe we can also look at that concept, Mr. President, the suability of our local government units and other government agencies. But we have to provide also now the mechanism na yung mananalo sa kaso ay hindi pirik victory ito. Dapat may actual makukuha siya from the government agency na kinasuhan niya.
I agree with you, Mr. President. The difference between other countries like the US, Western countries, and the Philippines, doon kasi pag may mga pabayaan ng mga ahensya ng gobyerno or even companies for that matter, pwede mademanda. That's why these companies, meron sila palaging insurance na binibili, liability insurance. Dito sa atin, hindi mo pwede, you cannot sue the city government, you cannot sue the barangay, you cannot sue the utility companies or any agency for that matter. Ang gagawin nila nito mga naagrabyado, it's either magsumbong sa akin or magmakaawa na sana sila kawan at sila ibibigyan ng compensation. Unlike sa other countries na pwede nila idemanda kung sino karapat-dapat imanda and then in the end, nanalo sila, bibigyan sila malaking compensation. That's why nag-iingat po ang marami sa mga ahensya ng gobyerno at iba pa yung mga ahensya doon sa ibang bansa.
Sa ibang bansa po. That's why ang instruction ko nga sa staff ko, aralin yung the suitability of the government agencies and then pag manalo, how will the monetary award be satisfied? Yun po. Kasi dito, ang alam ko, papadaan mo pa sa COA, pa-approve mo sa COA. In case of the national government, daan mo pa sa COA, and then palagay mo pa sa GAA. Ganun po kabusisi. So we have to find a way na to make it efficient, more efficient, this judicial course. Hopefully, hindi na dumating doon, pero dapat parating may recourse to judicial processes, Mr. President.
Mr. President, kung pwede ko lang maidugtong itong another case ito, pero medyo similar. That's why I'm passing a bill na kung saan i-require ko po lahat ng mga kontraktor na bago silang magbungkal ng lupa o umpisahan yung project na nakuha na sa DPWH, they should buy an insurance for that particular project. Kasi sa ngayon, ang dami ko na pong mga kaso na nakatiwangwang lang yung mga proyekto nila, naging pabaya sila, may mga nasugatan, namatay pa. And yet, walang pambayad yung contractor. So ang nangyayari po, yung mga biktima o pamilya ng biktima, kulang na lang po lumuhod doon sa contractor. And kuminsan yung contractor, tatalikod, kuminsan suplado pa, hagisan na po ng barya, tama niya, yun lang kaya namin. Pero kung nirequire mga ito na magkaroon ng insurance, then the insurance will take over kung sakali man may nangyari. In this way, later, itong insurance company, iba-blacklist ito mga pabaya na mga contractor, tataas sa kanilang premium, magpapakatino na po sila ang maging result.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sana nga sa hearing lumabas po ng lahat ng ideas na ito at natin talagang maging enforceable. Siguro, Mr. President, di ba yung black spaghetti, so ang isang remedy doon, i-rationalize yung shared use ng mga poles, no? And then, may nabanggit po yung ating speaker na si Architect Palafox. Ano ba yung suggestion niya? Underground, pero meron na ba tayong idea? Ano ba yan? Is it more expensive to bury the wires underground than to let them hang over polls, Mr. President?
So, umpisa pa lang kasi hindi po talaga nakaset up. Well, of course, gagastos po tayo, Mr. President. May kamahalan yan. Pero pag tumagal-tagal na, nagawa natin, nagkaroon ng proper setup, mas makamura at mas safe pa, Mr. President.
Okay. So mukhang mas safe nga kasi, well, less of sa fire hazard na lang. Less of a fire hazard na siguro yun. And then, of course, yung mga aksidente na tatamaan sa leeg, yung ating mga riders. Apo. So with that, Mr. President, let me congratulate again our Speaker, Senator Raffy Tulfo, for bringing this before our attention, Mr. President. Kailangan natin tugunan itong mga ganitong problema na pang everyday na encounter, and before they cost lives. Although I'm sure these have cost lives. Salamat na lang sa examples ng ating speaker. Hindi nag-cost ng lives pero severe injuries din iba ron, and of course the trauma that's a near-death experience, Mr. President. So thank you for bringing this to our attention, Senator Raffy Tulfo.
Thank you. Sana pwede ko rin may dagdag kung mag-hearing po kayo, Senator Raffy, yung mga poste sa kalsada na hindi pa nila tinatanggal. Bago na yung sementado na yung daan, may poste sa gitna dahil wala daw budget ang kooperatiba para mailipat nyo sa shoulder ng kalsada. So it's actually a major road hazard. Talagang nabubunggo yan ng mga tao, motor, tao. Pag sa probinsya, Sir Raffy, makikita mo yan. Maraming, alam din ni Senator Sherwin yan, nagkaroon yata ng hearing sa dati dyan about that issue of poles, electricity poles na nasa gitna ng kalsada dahil hindi naililipat ng electric cooperatives.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. President, with that, I move that we refer the privileged speech of Senator Tulfo and the interpellations thereon to the Committee on Public Works and the Committee on Energy. So move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
Mr. President, at this juncture, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2492 under Committee Report number 172. This is the bill on the Philippine Maritime Zones Act. So move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
Mr. President, the parliamentary status of the measures that we are now in the period of interpellations and debate, and with the consent of the body, I move to resume the period of interpellation and recognize the sponsor of the measure, the gentleman from Cavite, Senator Francis Tolentino, and to continue with this interpellation, our Minority Leader, Senator Coco Pimentel III.
Our distinguished sponsor, Senator Francis Tolentino, is recognized and to interpolate the distinguished Minority Floor Leader, Senator Aquilino Coco Pimentel III. Please proceed.
Anong sagot na sa akin
Thank you, Mr. President, and this will be a continuation of my previous interpellation, which was conducted through by online means, Mr. President. With the permission of our sponsor.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Yesterday, Mr. President, Senator Padilla, Robin Hood Padilla, raised the issue of a claim over land territory and why isn't the maritime entitlements of that claimed land territory belonging to the Philippines not expressly mentioned in the bill, Mr. President. And if I understand correctly, the answer for the sponsor is because this is about waters and not about land, Mr. President. So specifically, what maritime zones are we expressly mentioning and claiming in this bill, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President, to recapitulate what this representation mentioned yesterday, the maritime zone law is specifically based on the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, and UNCLOS being the main basis under international law of our own version of maritime law, will not involve itself or settle any territorial or sovereignty disputes between states. Our maritime zone law, as asked by the Minority Leader, would only involve our waters, and I'm referring to the territorial sea, the contiguous zone, the archipelagic waters, as well as the exclusive economic zone. So the matter of our claim over Sabah is not, I repeat, I underscore, is not part of the maritime zone law, because the maritime zone law refers only to waters, not land, not territory. So the settlement of the same would involve another regime. And as a landmass itself, Sabah or North Borneo will have its own outward, seaward maritime zones. It will have its own baseline. It will have its own territorial sea. It will have its own contiguous zone as well as an exclusive economic zone utilizing a normal baseline. I can place this here first, Mr. President. So this map, Mr. President, would show that as I explained yesterday, this map would show the archipelagic baseline of the Philippines, which is based on the archipelagic doctrine, while Sabah will have its own normal baseline. So I think that was the, if I can recall, that was the exact wording I mentioned yesterday, Mr. President.
Okay, please. Yes, please. The Senate President will approach the exhibit. Yes.
Let the record state that the Senate President is approaching the exhibit being shown by this representation.
May I ask if that is a painting done by our sponsor, Mr. President?
No, this is not a painting. This is a computer-generated map of the
Because
Philippines.
it's a nice image, Mr. President. So the
The
sponsor,
records will show that the Senate President appreciated the exhibit shown by this representation.
the sponsor, Mr. President, has mentioned baselines, and actually he pointed to the baselines. The baselines are provided and governed by another law, Mr. President.
Correct, Mr. President. We have a baseline law approved by the Congress, and the meets and bounds starting from the north, and I'm referring to Yami Island, and our baselines law would show the exact longitude, latitude, etc., to specify the archipelagic baselines, and the archipelagic baselines law would just encompass Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. So that's why if I will relate that to my previous statement yesterday, it will not encompass Sabah because Republic Act 9522, the Philippine baselines law, is just limited to this archipelagic waters as contained in 9522.
Because,
And
Mr.
as affirmed by Magallona versus Executive Secretary.
Because RA 9522 is meant to be not merely a baselines law, but an archipelagic baselines law. Is that correct, Mr. President?
Correct, Mr. President, because because it has to be differentiated with ordinary baseline,
Right.
the normal baseline. This is, and there are only 22
right.
countries, Mr. President.
Yeah.
with-
Which can claim to be archipelagos, Mr. President?
Correct, Mr.
22?
President. Yes, Mr.
I mean, do we have the list, Mr. President?
I have a
So pwede natin ibangga, Mr. President, if we want to research on the laws. I know, of course, Indonesia is one, and the
Yes,
Philippines.
Papua New Guinea.
Papua New Guinea,
I think it must have been
Yes. Yes,
covered by some of the documents.
Yes, sige lang,
here.
Mr. President. But at least we know there are 22.
Yes.
But can we get the general definition of what an archipelago is, Mr. President? Para makita natin na the Philippines is indeed an archipelago.
Yes, an archipelago, Mr. President, pursuant to Article 47 of UNCLOS, is the drawing of straight archipelagic baselines by joining the outermost points of the outermost islands and drying reefs of the archipelago, provided that such baselines are included within the main islands, and I refer to Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao, and an area in which the ratio of the water, of the area of the water to the land, including the atolls, is between 1:1 and 9:1. And the length of the baselines shall not exceed 100 nautical miles, except, this is going to be technical, except that up to 3% of the total number of the baselines enclosing any archipelago may exceed that length up to a maximum length of 25 nautical miles. So the general rule is that the drawing of the baseline shall not depart to any appreciable extent from the general configuration of the archipelago. The archipelago here is now the Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao. Anything within the archipelagic baselines would form part of the archipelagic waters of the Philippines. So the archipelagic waters would be akin to the territorial waters of any country signatory to the Law of the Sea Convention, Mr. President. So this is a product, Mr. President, of the Philippines intervention during the three UNCLOS, and Senator Arturo Tolentino was one of the main architects of the archipelagic theory, Mr. President.
So the archipelagic baselines, Mr. President, are not maritime zones.
The archipelagic baselines are considered as maritime zones, Mr. President, because when you speak of maritime zones, you talk of territorial sea, internal waters, and the baselines would be the starting point of our territorial sea, contiguous zone, the 24 nautical miles, the 200 nautical miles exclusive economic zone. So the archipelagic baseline would mean that anything within the baselines would form part, as I've said, would form part of our archipelagic waters. These are our territorial waters wherein we have complete sovereign jurisdiction, Mr. President.
Yeah. Yes, Mr. President, because Section 2 of our bill, paragraph 1, enumerates the maritime zones. Archipelagic baselines are not maritime zones, Mr. President, but from what I get from our sponsor, we need to discuss them because they determine some of the maritime zones. Not all, but some, because some are landward, some are also outward, Mr. President.
Correct, Mr. President. If you recall the previous picture I showed, yung sabi niyo pa nga, Mr. President, drawing ko, that would, if I can get it back, nandun po sa...
Sige po.
Everything within would be considered internal. So, archipelagic baselines would be our starting point as we draw seaward. If we draw inwards, that will be our internal waters, Mr. President.
And also archipelagic waters, Mr. President.
Yes.
Landward, yes.
Yes. That will include the bays, the rivers, etc.
That's why I'm worried, Mr. President. Section 3 of the bill, page 2, line 1, Section 3 baselines. We are not changing the laws governing our archipelagic baselines, Mr. President.
Correct.
We do not even intend to touch it, right, Mr. President? So why is it needed to restate it, Mr. President, in our bill?
It is needed, Mr. President, because we will be, for the first time, under this measure, we will be claiming our contiguous zone. We will be claiming the extent of our contiguous zone, which was mentioned in another law, but we have yet to claim it. Although we are entitled to our contiguous zone, we have to claim it, Mr. President. So, if we do the same, it likewise would follow that the exclusive economic zone would likewise have to be claimed, and the rights attached to both zones would have to be claimed as well. I'm now referring to fishing rights. I'm now referring to the rights over living and non-living elements that can be found in the area, and as well as perhaps clarify what is happening geopolitically in this area of the West Philippine Sea in terms of our continuing struggle with China, if I'm now to be precise, over the extent of what they are claiming as part of their now 10-dash line. So, Mr. President, we started the baseline. Thereafter, we claim our entitlements through this law. We exercise law enforcement within our territorial sea. In our contiguous zone, we exercise some rights as a coastal state. Lahat pong ito nagpapatunay na tayo yung coastal state. So that would include migration, fiscal, environmental, sanitary, etc., etc. So, ngayon pa lang natin gagawin to, and it would really show, and it's not just limited, Mr. President, to the West Philippine Sea. going to the other side, the eastern portion, the eastern seaboard, we're now claiming another area formerly known as the Benham Rice, which is now the Philippine Rice, as part of our territory. So I've said this before, Mr. President, the baselines will be the starting point. And then, to answer your query a while ago, the 22 archipelagic states, if I'll be given permission, Antigua, Bahamas, Cape Verde, Comoros, Dominican Republic, Fiji, Grenada, Indonesia, Jamaica, Maldives, Marshall Islands, Mauritius, Papua New Guinea, the Philippines, St. Vincent and Grenades, Tuvalu, Solomon Islands, among others, Mr. President. So konti lang po tayong merong archipelagic zone, Mr. President. So I hope I have
Yes.
enumerated some. I think I've
Thank you,
enumerated
Mr. President.
18 or 19.
Sige, Mr. President, ito lang po. So what we've learned from the sponsor, as I understand it, is that although the UNCLOS enumerates maritime zones, this must be claimed by the state or a coastal state, Mr.
Yes.
President. Okay.
Yes, Mr. President.
Thank you for that insight, Mr. President.
We are duty bound.
So hindi
Okay.
automatic that just because you're a coastal state
Yes.
or you're an archipelago,
Yes.
you define your baselines, that's not enough.
That's not enough,
Enough,
Mr. President.
okay.
And this law will likewise be submitted to the UNCLOS Secretariat, to the United Nations, for the other signatories to take notice of that we have such a law, including non-signatories. Non-signatories such as the United States, although they have their own version, which is the United States, even if they're not a signatory to UNCLOS, they have adopted almost all the UNCLOS provisions, starting with the declaration of President Truman to Roosevelt. All of the presidential proclamations are UNCLOS compliant. So it's the same. So the whole global community are recognizing UNCLOS, and adopting this would make us part of that global maritime community, us recognizing their maritime zones law and them recognizing our laws likewise.
Going back to Section 3 on baselines, Mr. President, as written in the bill, are we changing any concept or rule found in RA 9522 as amended, Mr. President?
Wala po, Mr. President.
Ito pong Section 3, may paragraph A, may paragraph B. Are these two paragraphs found in 9522?
9522, Mr. President, is in compliance with UNCLOS. 9522, as affirmed by Magallona Vice Executive Secretary, is UNCLOS compliant. So we are just restating all of this, specifically where we have sovereignty, and if I may be allowed, RA 9522 is the first step. And these are all, this would be consistent not just with our constitution, consistent with UNCLOS, and consistent with our national interest. So parang ganito po. Stepping stone, first step is RA 9522. After RA 9522, we make our claims. We're not automatically entitled.
Right.
We project seaward.
Right.
And the projection would not just be in terms of geographical boundaries, but would include all the living, non-living, sedimentary, and other political rights we have in the area.
And economic.
Yes, economic. So all of this would be consistent, as what Magallona was Executive Secretary enunciated, would be consistent with our Constitution and with our national interest. Kung hindi po natin gagawin to, naging signatory lang tayo, naging signatory tayo sa UNCLOS, nagkaroon lang tayo ng boundary, wala naman tayong ginawa. So it will trigger the applications of other diplomatic and international norms. You're not talking of navigation, laying of submarine cables, harnessing the energy in the seabed, as well as our protracted geopolitical rifts and clashes ongoing right now. So, ito po talaga yung simula.
Yes, sir.
Oh.
That's very clear, Mr. President. Actually, my question is, if RA 9522 will not be touched in any way, we are restating it in Section 3 in our bill. I fear that we might inadvertently be restating it. So, ang question ko po, for example, Mr. President, ito po bang Section 3A, beginning at line 5 on page 2, which I will read. Archipelagic baselines for the Philippine archipelago drawn in accordance with Article 47 of UNCLOS. Is that found in RA 9522?
RA 9522 technically followed Article 47 of UNCLOS. So it's a domestic application of an international law because 9522 speaks of the meets and bounds. Ito po yung, I think it's in my other notes. Ito po yung eksaktong yung nabanggit ko kanina, yung Yami Island, the coordinates.
Opo.
The coordinates. The coordinates established under 9522 are all in compliance with UNCLOS. So, by crafting a maritime zone law, we are just reiterating that the baselines law was in compliance with UNCLOS, and all rights and ramifications of the baselines law, the maritime zones law, are all in compliance with the law of the sea, the international law. Because when we craft a maritime zone law, the implications, Mr. President, would not just be domestic, the international and our foreign policy, Mr. President. So, lahat ito nire-iterate natin para ipahayag, patunayan na tayo ay sumusunod sa international law, ang Pilipinas is a good member of the international community, at lahat ng ating pinapatupad na batas, gagawing batas, ay sang-ayon sa international law. Sang-ayon sa ating saligang batas at para na rin po sa kapakanan ng ating mamamayan.
Yes, Mr. President. Ang worry ko lang, Mr. President, is economy of expression, economy of words, Mr. President. If we don't intend to touch the baselines law, RA 9522, can we not simply say in Section 3 that the baselines of the Philippines shall be pursuant to Republic Act number 9522? Period, Mr. President. Wala na yung A and B. Because akala ko aminado naman tayo that the baselines that was followed in RA 9522 followed Article 47 of UNCLOS. And how about letter B, Mr. President? Did we follow that also in 9522? That normal or straight baselines as appropriate for all other territories over which the Philippines has sovereignty or jurisdiction drawn in accordance with Article 5, 6, 7, 13, and 21 of UNCLOS?
Perhaps, Mr. President, the normal baseline here, the straight baseline, would perhaps refer to the areas near northern Luzon, Zambales, going to the Ilocos region, wherein there would be no cluster of islands that would implicate the application of the archipelagic baselines definition, as I mentioned a while ago. So, from this contour, Mr. President, some kind of normal or straight baselines would be applicable here. And the same probably, Mr. President, would be applicable to this area of the Zamboanga Peninsula. The Zamboanga Peninsula would be a big chunk of landmass wherein the normal baseline would be applicable. But for the entirety of the archipelago, the definition of the archipelagic baselines would be applicable. The outermost islands, the tip, the drying reef would be applicable.
The length of the line.
Yes, I mentioned a while ago 25 nautical miles. So both of them would be applicable, Mr. President. Insofar as Republic Act 9522 is concerned. So applicable po sa atin yan kasi hindi naman tayo kalat-kalat lang. May malalaki din tayong island na na ito pong side ng Aurora, Isabela would also have its own normal baseline, Mr. President.
But my question, Mr. President, is Section 3B, yung binasa ko, yung normal street
Yes.
baselines as appropriate, is that found in RA 9522 or is that a new idea that we are introducing in our bill, Mr.
No,
President?
it's not a new idea, Mr. President, because that's the normal baseline. That's the definition of a normal baseline. Yung kontur po ng lupa na yung kontur po ng lupa. So, yun po yung sinusunod, hindi na yung archipelagic. So, yung sa 9522, nakalagay po doon yung kung ilan. We have 5 normal baselines, 6 reefs, 7 straight baselines, 13 low tide elevations, etc. etc. So, kasi kakaiba po ang Pilipinas eh. Meron tayong isla na pulupulutong, naka-cluster. Meron naman tayong malaking lupa. Itong ang nabanggit ko, itong Northern Luzon, Isabela, Pasiguran, tapos sa western side, you have the Zambales, Northern Luzon, Ilocos region na buo, and then the Zamboanga Peninsula. So, but if you look at Palawan, it can have a normal baseline in an area, but once you go to the upper part, may mga islands na po. So, you'll be applying the archipelagic baseline designed by UNCLOS. And all of this are encapsulated in our Republic Act 9522.
So, in short, Mr. President, Section 3 of our bill does not introduce any new idea. Lahat ito ay already expressed and stated in RA 9522.
So
Is that a fact, Mr. President?
It's a fact, Mr. President,
Okay,
but
so-
in our desire to really claim our maritime entitlements, before we announce to the entire world, we own this, we show them that we are applying the United Nations law of the sea and we are compliant. So all of this are enshrined in the various sections which Section 3B enumerated articles 5, 6, 7, 13 and 121. So it's a signal to the world that we are all what we have done. The archipelagic base, the Republic Act 9522, which is the starting point, is in compliance. We're not violating anything. We don't have a 10-dash line. We don't have a 9-dash line. All of these are part of a rules-based regime. Sumusunod po ang Pilipinas. Kaya sa simula pa lang, pinapakita natin sa kanila, isasubmit din natin ito, na yung ginawa nating starting point, yung ating archipelagic baselines, ay base po sa napagkasunduan sa law of the sea.
RA 9522 was promulgated in year 2009, Mr. President. So definitely conscious na po tayo dun sa UNCLOS and familiar na siguro tayo sa principles ng UNCLOS and we followed UNCLOS. So at least we have established this afternoon that Section 3 of the bill on baselines simply cites RA 9522 and does not change any of the concepts there. So, parang I get the impression that it's a defensive statement, although no one has really alleged that our 9522 is against sa UNCLOS. Compliant na po yan, 2009 na po yan, 1982 pa yata ang UNCLOS. So, our lawmakers with advice from DFA and other technical people would definitely have complied with the UNCLOS, Mr. President. So, I'm pointing this out because it might be safer to simply refer to that law, RA 9522, as providing for our baselines or archipelagic baselines. Because as stated by our sponsor, dito tayo mag-uumpisa. Okay, Mr. President.
Correct.
Thank you.
Correct, Mr.
So
President.
thank you. If our sponsor can just take note of that input from this representation, Mr. President.
Duly noted, Mr. President.
And then the maritime zones, Mr. President, that we are taking advantage of, that we have to claim, are found in Section 2, Paragraph 1, and these are 6 possible maritime zones that we are claiming. Internal waters, archipelagic waters, territorial sea, contiguous zone, exclusive economic zone, and continental shelf. Yun po yan. So our bill claims at least 6 maritime zones recognized under UNCLOS, Mr. President.
Correct, Mr. President.
Okay, so 6 po ako. Is there a need for a law, Mr. President, or can an executive proclamation already claim these maritime zones, Mr. President? Kasi sabi niyo po, Mr. President, it all starts with the archipelagic baseline. Meron na tayong batas nun 2009 pa So, UNCLOS gives us
The baseline.
Yeah, the baseline. Yes, UNCLOS gives us the formula, di ba? Plus 12 nautical mile would be territorial sea. The next 12 nautical miles would be contiguous zone. From baseline to 200 nautical miles would be exclusive economic zone. Maximum of 315 nautical miles from the baseline would be the extent of the continental shelf, I think, Mr. President. So, hindi po ba automatic na yun na can it be done by executive action through a presidential proclamation? Like, I think yung Philippine rice was, lagay ko na lang sa quotation marks for lack of a better word, claimed under proclamation number 489. And the West Philippine Sea, we gave it its name through AO 29, Mr. President. So can what we want to achieve in this bill not be achieved through executive action, Mr. President?
No, Mr. President. No, Mr. President. I think legislation is needed, Mr. President. As admitted by the good minority leader, the starting point is the Archipelagic Baselines Law, Republic Act 9522, and the basis of that is legislation. The Congress enacted 9522, Mr. President. So what I'm saying is this: we will be enforcing laws, Mr. President. We will, as a member of the international community, as signatory to UNCLOS, UNCLOS is now part of the laws of the land. We will be enforcing laws, and other laws will be implicated. I'm now referring to customs laws, fiscal, immigration, sanitary laws within the territorial sea. So the coastal state should have a legislative handle insofar as enforcement, because we're now talking of laws which cannot be amended. Yesterday, we've been talking about the Commission on Elections. I'm digressing a bit, attempting to amend through resolutions, Republic Act 6735. So to really have a regime of laws harmonizing international law as well as domestic laws, we should have a mother law that would enable us to firmly claim our maritime entitlements. And I believe, Mr. President, that no single law student, first-year law student, would claim that a mere executive fiat should be allowed, given that we are implementing international law as well as several other laws, environmental law, archaeological laws, etc., etc. And this is really the heart of our sovereignty, Mr. President. The previous, no offense, the previous executive edicts mentioned by the minority leader would refer just to the renaming of the Benham rice, the Philippine rice, the renaming of the portion of the South China Sea to the West Philippine Sea. We need legislation. Ulitin ko rin yung mga ginagamit sa ibang batas natin, arguments kahapon. Kung yung paggagawa nga ng pagpapalit ng pangalan ng karsada, kailangan natin ng batas. Hindi na natin pinaubaya lang sa gobernador o sa mayor ang pagpapalit ng pangalan ng isang kalye, umakyat pa sa Kongreso, sa Senado, lalo na ho ito. Ito na ho yung kinabukasan ng Pilipinas. Ito na ho yung pwedeng pagmula ng sigalot. Ito rin yung pwedeng pagmula ng kayamanan. Lalong-lalo na po kung ang pag-uusapan natin, hindi lang yung yaman dagat na isda, kung saan 40%, dito po tinutukoy ko yung sa West Philippine Sea kanina, kung hindi po yung projected energy source na pwedeng kunin, Mr. President. So, yun po, Mr. President, kailangan po natin ng batas.
Yes, sir. Can we look, is that confirmed by state practice, by
Yes.
the state parties
Yes.
to the UNCLOS, and that is their practice, that when they claim the maritime zones recognized
Yes.
under UNCLOS, they do it through legislation?
Correct, Mr.
Thank you.
President.
That's very clear, Mr. President. So, that means since earlier we established that these zones are not automatically given to the coastal states, they have to be claimed, and they have to be claimed through law. So this is what we're doing, Mr. President.
Correct, Mr.
Okay.
President.
So thank you for that input, Mr. President. And Mr. President, can we ask for a minute suspension so that we can approach and examine the exhibit of our sponsor, Mr. President?
Session suspended.
Mr. President, this exhibit has nothing to do.
The parliamentary status of the measures that we are still in the period of interpellation. May we recognize again the principal sponsor of the measure, Senator Francis Tolentino, and to continue with this interpellation, our Minority Leader, Senator Coco Pimentel III.
Thank you, Mr. President. This will just be a continuation of my interpellation, and we'll try to keep it brief, Mr. President, so we can terminate the interpellation and move on, Mr. President. Just an observation, Mr. President, and I hope the sponsor and his team will take note of this. I have noticed that Section 4 on internal waters reads as follows, no? Especially up to paragraph A. The internal waters of the Philippines, as appropriate, shall refer to the following. A. Waters on the landward side of the archipelagic baselines not forming part of archipelagic waters under Section 5 of this Act and delineated in accordance with Article 50 of UNCLOS. That is Section 4A. While Section 5, first paragraph, reads as follows. The heading is archipelagic waters. The archipelagic waters of the Philippines refer to the waters on the landward side of the archipelagic baselines except as provided for under Section 4 of this Act. So I noticed that Section 4 refers to Section 5 and Section 5 refers to Section 4. So I found it very hard, Mr. President, to understand the two paragraphs I have just read, Mr. President. What would be the exception under Section 4 that they are not part of archipelagic waters under Section 5, and yet what would be the archipelagic waters which are accepted under Section 4, Mr. President?
No, it's not confusing. It's confusing, Mr. President, but they complement and supplement each other. Mr. President, when you refer to internal waters, you refer to the bays, the rivers. Effectively, Mr. President, these are all yung drawing na ganun. I'm just getting my
Yes, sir.
exhibit. So, Mr. President, if you look at this, the internal waters here would be going inland, and then the archipelagic archipelagic waters here would also encompass the internal waters here. But there would be a different regime, Mr. President. For instance, in your archipelagic waters, while you have complete sovereign jurisdiction, vessels with permission are allowed. You have. I'm now talking of freedom of navigation, but in internal waters, they're not. Then a naval ship cannot go into Pasig River. A naval ship of the French Navy can pass by the Balintang Channel, Mr. President. So the seemingly confusing terminologies here would be explained by the case of Magallona versus Executive Secretary, wherein the internal waters, as one of the Supreme Court decision, are converted into archipelagic waters. That's the exact lingo of the Magallona Executive Secretary case. The waters are converted into archipelagic waters. The Philippines holds sovereignty of the water lying landward of the baselines, which encompass the airspace over it and the submarine areas underneath. Ma-applicable po sa atin yung ang question po dito ngayon, at siguro ang confusion arises kasi 22 lang po yung bansa na merong archipelagic waters. Ano ba yung pagkakaiba ng internal waters, archipelagic waters? As mentioned a while ago, internal waters are not subject to passage regimes by foreign flag vessels, while archipelagic waters are subject to innocent passage and archipelagic sea lanes, which your committee is trying to craft. Foreign vessels can pass through archipelagic waters to get from one part of the EEC to another EEC. So So as I've shown, examples would be bays, gulfs, mouths of rivers, etc., etc. The Philippines exercises absolute sovereignty over its internal waters and airspace. Ito po sa isang drawing, Mr. President. Dapat pala, dalawa yung ano ko.
Isa.
So, dito po yung internal waters.
Sige po.
So, exclusive, absolute sovereignty tayo sa internal waters and the airspace over it, as well as the seabed and subsoils. So, yung tanong po nyo, Mr. President, would probably be answered by the notion that there will be several rights triggered. That's why we have to specify clearly the internal waters as well as the archipelagic waters. But in areas, in some states, in some countries without archipelagic waters, halos pareho na po yun. Yung kanilang internal waters, yun na po yun. At siguro, ano ba mga bansa, yung mga pinag-uusapan nung iba nating kasama, yung mga Peru, mga Bolivia. So, iba po yung regime ng archipelagic at internal, but Magallanes, our Executive Secretary, tried to explain all of this, including the reiteration of the doctrine of auto-limitation na pwedeng payagan ng ating bansa na i-reclassify yung dagat na yung mga tubig na nakapaligid and then segregating internal from archipelagic as an exercise of auto-limitation. This was cited by the Magallanes First Executive Secretary case. So siguro matter of style, Mr. President, if the good minority leader can propose, but I believe, Mr. President, that all of this would have to be enunciated clearly because all of this would be part of the maritime zones which we are trying to pronounce effectively to the entire world that we will have a maritime zone of our own pursuant to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas, Mr. President.
So thank you for the response, Mr. President. Actually, I have no problem with internal waters and archipelagic waters as concepts, Mr. President. I believe I understand them. But the problem is we have to make sure that our law is also very clear because as mentioned by our sponsor, I think a copy of this law will be submitted to some international secretariat, Mr. President. So, itong Section 4 on internal waters, okay, which is clear. As far as I'm concerned, it's clear. The internal waters of the Philippines, as appropriate, shall refer to the following. A, doon lang tayo sa A mag-concentrate. Waters on the landward side of the archipelagic baselines not forming part of archipelagic waters under Section 5 of this Act and delineated in accordance with Article 50 of UNCLOS. So, meaning to say, we start with the archipelagic baselines, up towards land. If you're not archipelagic water, as defined in Section 5, you must be internal waters. That is clear. But my problem is with Section 5, this describing or defining archipelagic waters. It's phrased this way. The archipelagic waters of the Philippines refer to the waters on the landward side of the archipelagic baselines, except as provided for under Section 4 of this Act. So what is that? What is the except as provided for under Section 4 of this Act, Mr. President? That is what I find to be not so clear, Mr. President.
So,
and I worry if we submit this to an international body, Mr. President.
So the normal as I mentioned a while ago, Mr. President, the concept of international waters would mean that they're not subject to passage regimes by foreign flag vessels, etc., etc. So the exception would include the normal definition as your rivers, your bays, your gulfs, which are perhaps as part of the debates, we can refer this to the waters that are really considered municipal waters. Ito na yung mga Cagayan River, Mr. President, Pasig River. So they are. Yeah. So yung worry po ng ating kaibigan ay wala pong conflict yon at indeed yung yung exception natin ay yung exception natin would prove that the internal waters on the landward side of the baseline, ito po yun, bahagi po siya ng archipelagic waters, pero iba po yung delimitation of the internal waters because you can draw, you can close the lines. Wala yung drawing ko na.
Ang ibig po sabihin nito, except as provided for under Section 4 of this Act, means except the internal waters? Is that what we're trying to say?
Well,
That the archipelagic waters of the Philippines refer to the waters on the landward side of the archipelagic baselines, which are
Except-
not internal waters. Is that what we mean, Mr. President?
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
Correct because when you say archipelagic waters, ito na po yung nakakadaan yung mga malalaking barko, merong rights of innocent passage, magkakaroon na ng archipelagic sea lanes, Mr. President.
Yes,
Usually
yes.
yung internal waters, ito yung pwedeng isara yung mouth.
Yes, Mr. President. Yes,
Isara yung mouth ng Pasig River, isara yung mouth ng Laguna Tibay.
Over internal waters would be absolute sovereignty, Mr. President.
Correct, Mr.
Over
President.
archipelagic waters, there would be some concessions, Mr. President,
Under
UNCLOS,
international law.
Like the obligation to designate an
Sea
archipelagic
lanes.
sea lane, Mr.
Yes.
President. So yes, we understand that. So I hope the sponsor will just take into consideration
Matter of
the word-
phraseology.
Yes, Mr. President, because siguro doble ingat tayo rito because of what our sponsor said that this will be submitted to an international body. So let this be a work of art of the Philippine Congress, Mr. President, na talagang maganda ang batas na ito.
I totally agree.
Yes, Mr. On Section 6, Mr. President, for example, I notice also on definition ng territorial sea. When we define the territorial sea, we use also the term territorial sea. And let me show it, Mr. President. Section 6, territorial sea. The territorial sea of the Philippines refers to the adjacent belt of sea measured 12 nautical miles from the baselines of the territorial sea as provided in Section 3 of this Act, etc. So, Mr. President,
So the
I think there's
redundancy,
something wrong there, Mr.
yes,
President.
the territorial sea. We should refer to the adjacent belt of sea measured 12 nautical miles. That can be subjected to a refinement, Mr.
Yes,
President.
Mr. President. Thank you. Thank you for that, Mr. President.
But of course, we agree. There's no question insofar as the territorial,
The extent.
yes,
Yes.
is concerned.
So the extent and is it the position of the sponsor that the territorial sea must also be claimed by the coastal state, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President. Especially now, and I might be preempting the mind of the good minority leader, especially when we look at parts of the arbitral ruling, the 2016, because in that ruling, the Kalayaan Island Group shall have a territorial sea of its own, 12 nautical miles. And admittedly, the KIG is not part of the Philippine archipelago here, our baseline. So we will now be referring to another regime of islands, which is recognized by UNCLOS, and as I have mentioned a while ago, likewise mentioned in the arbitral ruling.
Isn't that or aren't the maritime zones of the KIG, which we claim, covered by Section 2, Paragraph 2, page 1 of the bill, Mr. President?
Which states that
Which states that all other territories over which the Philippines has sovereignty or jurisdiction likewise have the respective maritime zones as appropriate.
but specific to the features that I mentioned would be that the maritime zone that would be generated by the KIG will just be, as per the arbitral ruling, will just be the territorial sea, no contiguous zone, no exclusive economic zone, and that's also the same as Bajo de Masinloc, Mr. President.
So if that is not clear from Section 2, Paragraph 2, don't we need to make it clear in this maritime zones law, Mr. President?
Can I have that repeated?
Because the basic lesson taught to us by our sponsor is that the state must claim the maritime zones.
Yes.
Okay. So this bill covers the main Philippine archipelago,
Yes.
the maritime zones we are claiming.
Yes.
But over the course of our interpellation, we mentioned Philippine territories,
Yes.
not falling within the archipelagic baselines.
Correct, and that would
Don't
probably-
we need to now anticipate and also claim the maritime zones for these territories, Mr. President?
The problem with the other territories, and now we're treading the grounds of portions of the interpellations last night, might implicate our Sabah claim. And we don't have yet, in this area, we don't have yet a defined baselines, longitude, latitude configuration. But insofar as the other areas, like the ones I mentioned, specifically the Kalayaan Islands, this is covered by the arbitral ruling. That's why I have been saying that the mention of the arbitral ruling should be part of this legislation, because it will more or less define our rights under UNCLOS, as well as the rights we were able to claim by virtue of the 2016 Hague arbitral ruling. So it will clarify everything, Mr. President. So aside from the Kalayaan Island group, when we speak of territories over which the Philippines has sovereignty, the territories would probably pertain to the Kalayaan Island group, Bajo de Masinloc, and what was discussed last night, portions of North Borneo, Mr. President.
So why did we restrain ourselves in the drafting of the bill, Mr. President, and not just lift the entries in the arbitral ruling about the KIG and the Bajo de Masinloc, Mr.
We
President?
did mention the arbitral ruling.
No, not just a general mentioning of the ruling, but the specifics of the ruling, Mr. President. We could have reproduced it in the body of our bill, Mr. President.
It can be done, Mr. President, but as I've mentioned, we only refer to three: the KIG, Bajo de Masinloc, and North Borneo. Unfortunately, North Borneo is not part of
Not of the ruling.
the arbitral
Yes,
ruling.
yes.
So we made a general statement here that it's in section 15, adherence to existing laws. Other rights, and I quote, other rights of the Philippines relative to its maritime zones and entitlements shall be exercised in accordance with UNCLOS, the awards rendered in the South China Sea arbitration. We even mentioned the case numbers and other pertinent laws and regulations of the Philippines and international law. When we say international law, we're now referring to customary international law, and that would cover North Borneo, Mr. President. That's section 15.
Yes, I see it, Mr. President. But no, as I understand it, that there are some elaboration of our maritime entitlements in the arbitral ruling,
Correct.
2016, concerning, as I get it from a sponsor, concerning KIG and Scarborough Shoal. So what would be the damage, Mr. President, if we get the details of our maritime entitlements per the ruling and then reproduce the entries in our bill, Mr. President, rather than a general referral to or reference to the arbitral ruling, and then parang by incorporation we are making part of the ilang pages ba yung arbitral ruling, the more than 200 pages, I think,
yes.
Mr. President.
I agree, Mr.
By
President.
incorporation, they will be deemed part of the law, Mr. President.
I agree,
And,
Mr. President. In fact,
I don't believe that each and every one of us has read the entirety of the ruling, Mr. President.
I agree, Mr. President. In fact, under section 2, the bill mentioned the 2016 South China Sea arbitration. But if the good minority leader can propose an additional clarificatory provision here that would mention the victories gained, specifically the islands, mentioned, because as I mentioned during the previous debates, we won 97%.
Of our claims.
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
3% na lang yung hindi maliwanag. So, I agree if the gentleman can propose an amendment.
Yes, so thank
To
you for that.
specify.
And if we exert such an effort, Mr. President, and make this extensive amendment of our bill, can we dispense with referring to the arbitral ruling in our bill?
There has got to be a basis for the reinforcement of our claim, considering that the regime of islands, which is part of UNCLOS, that's part 8 of UNCLOS, is not covered by this. It's in another area. It's another area. It's not covered by our archipelagic baselines. So if it would generate its own territorial sea as part of the arbitral ruling, and then if it would have its own distinction by virtue of Part 8 of UNCLOS, there's no harm in doing that. My only apprehension, Mr. President, is that there are still some administrative undertakings that would have to be done by NAMRIA. NAMRIA has to validate the status of each feature in the Kalayaan Island group, the longitude, the latitude, and it will take time for them, they can do that, of course, to determine whether a certain feature is of a high tide or low tide elevation. So what this proposed legislation aims to attain is to have a general umbrella sans all of this detailed administrative work to be done. Hindi nga makapunta tayo minsan doon ng resupply. Di ba? So baka doon magkaano yung validation. Although may mga ano naman sila, meron silang sukat-sukat na. But I don't see any harm in including that.
Yes,
Mr. President.
Yes, we will try to do it, Mr. President. And isn't there a law? Isn't there already a law which expresses the Philippine claim over the KIG, Mr. President?
There is, Mr.
Also,
President.
can we not also just cite that law, Mr. President? Like just
There is
as we cited the RA 9522 as the starting point, the baseline. We can cite that law, Mr. President. Did we cite it in the bill, Mr. President?
Yes, nandun po. And other pertinent laws and regulations of the Philippines.
But we could be more specific,
That's
Mr. President.
section 15 of the bill, Mr. President.
We could be more specific, Mr. President, siguro, because we will claim the maritime zones flowing out of that
Yes.
the territories claimed under that law, Mr. President.
Yes, but the main validating act would emanate from the arbitral ruling. That's yours. You have a territorial sea. That's yours. So no matter how we proclaim to the entire world by virtue of our domestic law that is ours, there has got to be acceptance by the United Nations, by the international community, by virtue of our entitlement under UNCLOS. And the arbitral ruling really gave us a big push insofar as our claims are concerned.
May we know, Mr. President, the page in the arbitral ruling where the tribunal granted, recognized territorial sovereignty over KIG? Because I thought the tribunal qualified its ruling as only referring to maritime entitlements, Mr. President, and it avoided territorial claims or disputes, Mr. President.
Can I have a minute suspension, Mr. President, so I can take a look at my notes, Mr. President? Clearly stated in the bill, Mr. President. I agree, because in one previous law, Presidential Decree 1596, the Kalayaan Island Group was specifically mentioned as part of the province of Palawan, including the latitude thereof. So if the line of thinking of the minority leader to include the specific awards, because we will be in effect lifting from the arbitral ruling and converting it into several provisions in a domestic law. Would that be the tenor of the good gentleman's? Otherwise, there might be. Is the answer in the
Yes,
affirmative?
better to express in the law what our intention is rather than referring to a 400-page document and as if by incorporation they are made, all words therein are made part of the law. That's more dangerous. That's a more dangerous approach, Mr. President.
I agree, Mr. President. Wouldn't that mean that it is as if we are now venturing into a judicial recognition of a foreign judgment via legislative enactment? So I think there is also a way of having a one-catch-all provision here that the Philippine legislature, the Philippine Congress recognizes now, and by virtue of this measure is implementing the foreign judgment, similar to the New York Convention, which speaks of a judicial recognition of a foreign judgment. So it is as if we are domesticating a foreign judgment as part of our legislation. Hindi po ba kasya yun doon sa ang dami kasi nun eh. Baka maging
anyway,
voluminous itong ano natin.
We will stick to the subject matter of the bill, which is ito nga yung title.
Maritime.
An act declaring the maritime zones under the jurisdiction of the Republic of the Philippines. Kaya nga ang appeal ko, huwag natin kalimutan yung other parts under the jurisdiction of the Republic of the Philippines. They may not belong to the main archipelago, but maybe there are territories of the Republic of the Philippines. We have to include.
Yes,
we have to include them.
I totally agree. That's in Section 2.
And claim, precisely. But if we
Yes.
can specify, Section 2, Paragraph 2 would be the catch-all. But as much as possible, if we know and can identify the territory, let's name the territory, put the legal basis, and then follow the procedure of our author that we claim the maritime zones. We also mention what of the 6 maritime zones recognized under UNCLOS are we claiming for the territory. So that would be the approach, Mr. President.
So, Mr. President, in effect, we will elaborate in Section 8 the wins in Section 8, because most of our wins are in the exclusive economic zone. So, in effect, we will have we will mention the mischief reef, the second the Ayungin Shoal is as part of our exclusive economic zones, and probably
Hindi mo ba sila easy because of our
Easy.
baselines?
easy.
Yes, because
that's part of
we measure from our baseline. Pasok sila sa 200 nautical miles. So,
but
that's
because the proposition of the good minority leader is to mention the gains, I might be misinterpreted, by including the Kalayaan Island Group. Mas marami pa ho na pwedeng isama. Nabanggit ko yung Mischief Reef, nabanggit ko yung Ayungin Shoal, papunta na tayo dun sa Johnson Reef.
Then, Mr. President,
Portero. Isa-isahin na ho natin.
kung pwede wag natin problemahin yung hindi problema, because are those na minimension po nating sponsor, do they generate maritime zones? They are part of our maritime zone. They do not generate maritime zones.
They are part of our exclusive
Correct.
economic zone.
Yes.
And are being used. Some are being used as artificial islands, and artificial islands is a major part of the UNCLOS to be used for scientific research purposes. Let me clarify this. The artificial islands, for instance, the Mischief Reef, it's an artificial island. So if it's part of our exclusive economic zone, we can say it's part of our entitlement, though not constructed by us. So they may not have their own territorial sea, contiguous zone, exclusive economic zone, but under international law, they have a 50 nautical miles safety zone. Di ba naman usapan mo yun?
Because
Ayun po ang binigay ng UNCLOS.
a 50 nautical mile safety zone
Yes.
is given to
Artificial
what?
islands.
To artificial islands if they have been legally constructed, Mr. President. And we all know that who can construct artificial islands within the EEZ? That is the coastal state entitled to the
That's
EEZ.
another issue. That's
Yes, Mr.
another issue.
President.
So, kung babanggitin natin isa-isa, may mga kanya-kanyang features po na
That's Mr. President.
I might be mistaken. It's not 50,
I think
50
we
miles
can-
or
50 miles.
Oh,
Sige ba?
baka mali ako doon. It might be,
Apa.
but it generates its own. Ang tawag po doon, safety zone. Safety. Doon
But let us
dadaong
not,
yung mga
let us not
barko.
recognize the entitlements of artificial islands which we claim to have been illegally constructed within our EEZ, Mr.
Sa-
President.
sa
I think
akin-
we can simplify, we can not overcomplicate the matter, Mr.
Hindi,
President.
sa akin po, kaya ko
I'm-
nabanggit ito for purposes of this recorded historical debates. Kahit hindi po tayo nagpatayo noon, kahit hindi po iba yung nag-occupy noon, atin yon. Kahit hindi tayo nagbigay ng permiso, atin yon. And there might come a time na talaga magiging atin yon. Who knows, i-abandon nila yon.
Correct, Mr.
Who knows, i-turn over na lang sa atin.
Tama po.
Who knows, maging international sanctuary for shipwreck fishermen. Hindi ho natin masabi. But just because we were not the ones who initiated the construction, doesn't mean na give up na natin. Hindi, atin pa rin yun. Atin pa rin yun. May mangyayari na atin din yun.
I don't think
We're not giving
no
up.
one is proposing that we give up, Mr. President. Hindi ba the claim is there that reef is part of the Philippines EEZ. Unfortunately, another state constructed an artificial island, which will not change the nature of that feature, Mr. President. Tama po ba yan? That the feature retains its original feature.
Although they have destroyed the coral and marine ecosystem in the area, but atin pa rin yun.
And no
Kapag
one gives up the that square inch of
I was toying
feature,
with the
Mr.
idea
President.
of having a provision on illegally occupied islands shall remain under the sovereign jurisdiction of the Republic of the Philippines.
Is the position of His Honor, if the arbitral ruling is not mentioned in this bill, it loses its effectivity?
Para po.
Bakit po? That's
Kasi-
already part of international
Para
maritime
po,
law,
kasi
Mr. President.
si arbitral ruling ang nagbigay talaga ng liwanag at ngipin na ito yung tamang rehimen ng batas pandagat at kinilala ang karapatan ng Republika ng Pilipinas. Kung atin pong iwawaglit 'yon sa bahagi ng batas na ating binabalangkas, eh malaki pong kawalan. Kasi we're trying to claim our entitlement under UNCLOS, which has to be claimed. And I agree with the minority leader that it is the manner of claiming which fortifies our entitlement. But the arbitral award reinforced our claim. It gave substance to something which just came out of voluminous pleadings which we filed. It proved to the whole world and validated that this is part indeed of our exclusive economic zones and we have rights over living and non-living minerals or matters beneath the surface of the sea. So, ang kininahon natin lahat yung binigay sa atin, ilagay natin sa batas kasi pag kinaligtaan natin yon para namang nasayang po yung pagod natin lahat na ipaglalaban din ho natin tong maritime zone law eh. Another state will try to negate this similar to what other states and what we did with the 9-dash line. So ipaglalaban din natin ito. Eh, ang nagpatibay sa atin, nagbigay ng muhon at braso ay yung arbitral ruling. So I think wala akong masama na hindi banggitin.
Sige po, baka pwedeng
I was wrong. Safety zone, Mr. President, is just 500 meters.
500 meters.
It is allowed under 60, as Article
Sige po.
50 of UNCLOS, safety zone for artificial islands.
That's how much we trusted
500
you,
meters.
Your Excellency,
Kamali
Your
ako
Honor, that whatever
50 nautical miles.
figure you give us, we
Yes.
accept to be.
Pero I was correct in mentioning the words safety zone.
Yes, thank you
Pero
for that.
mali ako, I'm sorry. 500 meters lang pala.
Thank you po, thank you po, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, maybe we can pause here and then we can think over the two sides of the coin, whether it's best to incorporate the arbitral ruling in its entirety, word for word, by referring to it in our Philippine law, or is it safer to just claim the maritime entitlements of Philippine territory pursuant to UNCLOS? Because the position of this representation is this is a standalone bill or law that even without that arbitral ruling, it is the UNCLOS which we are using to make our maritime claims. And then the arbitral ruling has a life of its own. Part na po yan ng, is it part now of international law? Can we claim that, Mr. President?
Not
Yes,
just-
and is it final and unalterable already, Mr. President?
Yeah, I believe so, Mr. President.
President.
If we domesticate the scenario, the arbitral ruling would now form part of the jurisprudence of UNCLOS. So anytime you mention something about UNCLOS, you do not just refer to the Norway case, you do not just refer to the Bolga case, you now refer to the Philippine arbitral ruling, the South China Sea arbitral ruling. So it has now formed part of international law because of acceptance. So the more we incorporate that, the more we strengthen international law, which would be in our favor. In our favor, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President, my position is for as long as we are careful enough not to enact into law a principle or a fact contrary to the arbitral ruling, we should be careful not to do that, no? So that we can strengthen the ruling. But in my opinion, the safer thing to do is to exert effort and then put it in positive law, the wording that we want, Mr. President, and not just refer to the arbitral ruling. But at any rate, Mr. President, I think this will be thrown to the body to decide. So siguro we can ask for time to go over the issue, Mr. President.
I totally agree, Mr. President. Because
Ganun na lang po, Mr. President.
this will be a landmark legislation, Mr. President.
So
Totally agree.
In that spirit, Mr. President, maybe it's time for a break in the interpellation, Mr. President.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to the sponsor and our minority leader. At this juncture, Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2492. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
Mr. President, with the permission of the body, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2449. This is the bill on the organizational reforms in the Philippine National Police. So move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
Mr. President, the parliamentary status of the measure is that we are still in the period of individual amendments, and with the consent of the body, I move again to recognize the sponsor of the measure, Senator Ronald Bato de la Rosa, and to introduce individual amendments, no other than the chairperson of the Senate Blue Ribbon Committee, Senator Pia Cayetano.
There being no objection, motion is approved. Yes, gentlemen and ladies recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. We only have one more item left for amendment on the part of this representation. Thus, I move to reconsider the amendment on page 15, line 27, with the permission of the sponsor.
Yes, Mr. President.
So I move to delete the entire paragraph, and on page same. Page na. Because of the new draft, the paging has changed. So on page 11, after line 23, insert a new subsection J, which shall read as follows. J, Office of the Police Attaché. The office under the Directorate for Intelligence shall be composed of police attachés with the following functions. 1. Represent the PNP and the DILG before police and law enforcement agencies in foreign jurisdictions. 2. Network with police counterparts and law enforcement agencies of the host government. Intelligence exchange with local and foreign counterparts to combat terrorism and transnational crimes. 3, and then 4, social interaction with the diplomatic community as well as members of the international organization. 5, Mr. President, may I ask for a suspension?
Session suspended.
Signed to the United States of America, China, France, Indonesia, Malaysia, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Thailand, and its such foreign jurisdictions with which the Philippines is in cooperation with on law enforcement, exchange of information, and on preventing and combating crimes, provided that these countries will be subject to periodic reviews every 3 years unless there would be a supervening event that would necessitate an earlier review. Next paragraph. Police attachés occupying the position of police officer and diplomat shall have the rank of police colonel, provided that the police attaché in Washington, District of Columbia, United States of America, shall have the rank of police brigadier general, provided further that police attaché shall have a maximum term of 3 years per post. We submit, Mr. President.
Senator Tolentino.
I may be allowed to interject, Mr. President. Would the term with the maximum term of 3 years mean that it can be 2 years? The foreign posting in a major jurisdiction, could it mean, if the ceiling is 3 years, could it mean after 1 year you can be recalled by Camp Crame?
Yes, Mr. President. If the Chief PNP find it necessary to remove you from that post for cause, Mr. President, you can be removed. But kung wala kang ginagawang atraso, you can reach up to 3 years. But after 3 years, mandatorily, you have to be removed because the maximum is only 3 years.
No, Mr. President. For instance, I am with the permission of Senator Pia, I'm a police brigadier general, 1 star. After 1 year, my class promotion is due, and I'm about to become a regional director of, for instance, Region 8, somewhere in Samar and Leyte. My classmates are now up for promotion pursuant to a Napolcom issuance, and I'm still there in my foreign posting with a 1-star rank. Could I opt to return to the Philippines and join my mista and be promoted, or could I be qualified to be a 2-star police general even though the law as crafted provides that a police attaché in a major jurisdiction posting will only have 1-star rank? Can I have a 2-star?
No, Mr. President. No, Mr. President.
So-
And going back to your first issue, the Chief PNP can recall you at any time if he feels that you are ready to assume higher post, you are already promotable to the next higher rank, then pwede kanya i-recall, Mr. President. Yung nilagay natin dyan na cap na 3 years, para naman hindi siya mababa doon kasi kung susubra pa ng 3 years, baka yung career niya, makalimutan niya na pulis pala siya, baka isipin niya, diplomat na siya pag sumubra ng 3 years. So 3 years lang, para ma-maintain pa rin niya yung mentality niya pagiging pulis.
I raised that point, Mr. President, because the permission of Senator Cayetano, most of the time, and I'm now referring to diplomats, you don't just go there alone. You bring with you your family. You bring with you your children. And presumably, when you're a 1-star police general, your children of school age would be either senior high school or early college. So the possibility of them graduating and finishing school within the 3-year span would be very slim. So ang tinatanong ko po, hindi siya pwedeng maging 2-star kahit dahil nandun ka.
No.
Kailangan bumalik ka.
No, because the position as provided by this act requires for 1-star general only.
Do you sign a contract? Is there a contract when you're posted abroad?
Meron yan, Mr. President.
Okay.
Meron sila kontrata with the may mga papel yan na pinipirmahan.
Wala na po siguro ako maitanong at nagtatap na ng fingers si Senator Pia.
Hindi naman.
So, I just want to
Meron lang
clarify those matters, Mr. President. Thank you for the
Thank you,
response.
thank you.
Actually, on a similar note, not similar, but on a related note, when I asked for a minute suspension, Mr. President, because a big part of the amendment I read is really the original version of the sponsor. So when I read the word social interaction, I asked my staff, are you sure that's the right terminology? Because it says one of their function is social interaction with the diplomatic community. To me, it doesn't sound so professional, social interaction. But to my staff, Mr. President, the resource person of the sponsors. So if it's okay with His Honor, I will I adopted it. That's not my amendment. I adopted it because kung sana pwedeng pagandahin pa yon kaysa sa social interaction lang. Maganda sana kasi ang dating nga is similar what His Honor said na baka nag-enjoy na sila ng buhay nila doon as a diplomat. Ayoko naman ho ng ganun ang dating sa kanila because most of them take their job seriously and will really do their job. Baka sabihin nagso-socialize lang doon.
Mr. President, social interaction is just a coin word with a deep meaning.
Baka pala infiltration pala yun, ano?
It may be
Yun
a
pala yun.
cover word.
Okay, sige.
Cover word.
Okay. Understand, Mr. President. So, I reiterate that this is our amendment subject to style, Mr. President.
Mr. President, the amendment is properly and beautifully worded. So I accept wholeheartedly the amendment, Mr. President.
Yes, thank you very much. Therefore, amendment is accepted and approved.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Mr. President, another personal amendment from the sponsor on page 14, line 9. Delete the word director and replace it with the word commander. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, amendments approved.
That would be all, Mr. President. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, my dear sponsor.
Thank you,
Congratulations.
Mr. President. Mr. President, with no other individual amendments, I move to close the period of individual amendments. So move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
Mr. President, with the consent of the body, I move that we approve on second reading Senate Bill number 2449 subject to status. So move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motion is approved. Senate Bill number 2449 is approved on second reading. Congratulations for dear sponsor and the authors.
Thank you, Mr. President. We congratulate the distinguished gentleman from Davao and Bohol. Congratulations, Mr. President.
We are just working, Mr. President. We are working very hard for this country.
I am proud that I am working hand in hand, Mr. President, with the gentleman from Davao and Bohol. Not just
Yes.
working, but fighting for this institution, Mr. President.
Yes, and that we're doing our work. We're doing our work. So
Thank you, Mr.
congratulations.
President. Mr. President, with that, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2449. So move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
I have this. Mr. President,
Some admin matters, I think.
some admin matters, Mr. President. I've done this yesterday. Mr. President, in accordance to our rules, Rule 10, Section 18 of the Senate Rules, and upon the instruction of the chairperson of the Senate Committee on Constitutional Amendments and Revision of Code, Senator Robin Hood Padilla, may I manifest the creation of a subcommittee to hear RBH number 6 entitled "The Resolution of both Houses of Congress proposing amendments to certain economic provisions of the 1987 Constitution of the Republic of the Philippines, particularly on Articles 12, 14, and 16, with Senator Sani Angara as chairperson. As a manifest, Mr. President.
There being no objection, the manifestation is duly noted and approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, at this juncture, I move, with the consent of the body and pursuant to Article 6, Section 17 of our Constitution, I move to elect the new members of the Senate Electoral Tribunal, Senator Nancy Binay, Vice Senator Raffy Tulfo, and Senator J.V. Ejercito, Vice this representation. So move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, the enumerated members are hereby elected as the new members of the Senate Electoral Tribunal. Congratulations.
Mr. President,
Yes, Senator Tolentino, we're just about to adjourn. Yes, sir.
After conferring with the sponsor of the previous measure concerning the Police Reorganization Act, Mr. President, the sponsor agreed that the Senate President Pro Tem and this representation would also be co-authors of the measure previously approved on.
And if I may also have the honor to the sponsor to be a co-author and co-sponsor.
so as
I'm
this
author pala.
representation, Mr.
Oh, I'm
President.
already an author pala.
Mr. President.
I'm already an author.
The more, the merrier. I'm okay with that, Mr. President. Thank you.
If the author doesn't want me to be part of it, Mr. President, I will.
No.
I'm okay, Mr. President. Including the majority leader.
I'm just kidding. Mr. President, our Senate President
Yes,
Pro Tem is
just a
seeking the
question.
floor.
May I
Yes,
know the
madam.
status of the measure in the House of Representatives?
It's already approved on third reading.
On third reading.
Pass on their reading already.
Very good. Okay. Congratulations then. It's just a matter of a few days.
Yeah, to
Thank
the men and women of the PNP that are here today, congratulations to you, gentlemen. Alam ko matagal nyo na itong pinaglalaban. Mga ilang taon na. So, by next week, third reading na po ito. So, congratulations.
Yung magbe-birthday ng February, Mr. President, ay parang umiikot ng puwit nila ngayon dahil inihintay ito. Baka ma-extend pa sila ng 1 year.
Tama?
Inihintay nila.
May I just be allowed to make a short manifestation, Mr. President?
Yes, please.
Thank you,
go.
Mr. President. Mr. President, in commemoration of the 125th anniversary of the First Philippine Republic, which is being celebrated today, January 23, nais ko lang ipahayag, Ginoong Pangulo, noong Enero, ika-1 ng Enero, taong 1897, 2 taon bago pasinayaan ang unang republika sa simbahan ng Barasuing Church sa Malolos noong 1899, naganap po ang pinakamadugong digmaan sa kasaysayan ng Pilipinas, ang labanan sa Kakarong Sili sa Pandi, Bulacan. Mahigit 1,200 na mga katipunerong Bulakenyo ang minasakir ng mga Kastila. Sa dami po ng dugong dumanak sa digmaang iyon sa Kakarong de Sili, bumaha ng dugo at umabot pa daw po ang taas nito hanggang sa bukong-bukong. Bilang isang Bulakenyo, Ginoong Pangulo, naniniwala po ako na ito ang dugong nagpaalab at nagpatindi ng adhikain, hindi lamang ng mga revolusyonaryo, kundi ng lahat ng mga Pilipino para isulong ang independensya at itatag ang unang republika, ang unang malayang pamahalaan sa buong Asya. Ang isa po sa halos 6,000 mga revolusyonaryong Bulakenyo na nakipaglaban sa Kakarong de Sili ay ang aming ninuno na si Canuto Villanueva bilang Supremo. katuwang si Maestrong Sebio bilang Kapitan General. Ginoong Pangulo, ngayong araw po na ito ng pagpapasinaya sa unang republika, hinahamon tayong muli na bumangon at magbalik tanaw sa kasaysayan. At lubos ang paghanga ko po sa inyo, Ginoong Pangulo, Senate President Zubiri, dahil matapang niyo pong ibinahagi ang ilan sa mga aral na ito ng ating kasaysayan kaninang umaga sa dambana ng Barasuin Church. Kapakanan ng bayan bago ang sarili. Tulad ng inyong sinabi, Senate President Zubiri, hindi inisip ng mga nagsulat ng Malolos Constitution ang pansarili nilang kapakanan. Hindi nila sinamantala ang kanilang posisyon bilang tagapagbalangkas ng ating unang konstitusyon. I couldn't agree with you, Mr. President, when you said if the members of the Malolos Congress had wanted, they could have constitutionalized themselves into limitless power without regard for the voice of the people. As framers of the first constitution, no one could have stopped them. Instead, they chose for the Malolos Republic to be an uncompromising stand for freedom and independence. Malinaw po, Ginoong Pangulo, at alam kong narinig ng lahat ang inyong panawagan kanina. Mr. President, yung binanggit niyo pong anumang pagbabago sa ating saligang batas at dapat dumaan sa malalim na pag-aaral at konsiderasyon at hindi dapat mag-ugat ng mga makasariling mga motibo. Ilang beses na po akong naglabas-masok sa simbahan ng Barasuin, Mr. President, at aaminin ko po sa inyo na walang isang beses na ako'y hindi kinilabutan, lalo na po kapag nababasa ko yung historical marker kung saan nakasulat, dito, pinagtibay ang konstitusyon de Malolos. Mr. President, the Barasuin Church remains not only a piece or a place of worship, but the cradle of freedom and the shrine of democracy. After 125 years, we have not only preserved our republic, but we have also nurtured the flourishing of democracy within our institutions, particularly here at the People's Senate. In April 2018, Republic Act number 11014 was enacted, declaring January 23 of every year a special working holiday in the entire country to commemorate the declaration of the First Philippine Republic. A simple but very meaningful measure co-authored by this representation. Bilang isang Bulakenyo, muli Ginoong Pangulo, at bilang isang Pilipino, bilang empleyado dito sa Senado, hindi po ako magsasawang balik-balikan ang Barasuin. Aalalahanin ang mga ninuno nating nagbuwis ng buhay, ang tagumpay ng Malolos Congress, at ipaglaban ang pamana nito sa lahing Pilipino. Ang unang republika, ang ating demokrasya, at lagit-lagi unahin, higit sa lahat, ang interes ng mamamayang Pilipino. Mabuhay ang unang republika, mga Pilipinas, mabuhay ang Pilipinas. May God bless us all.
Maraming salamat.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, with the permission of the body, I move that we proceed with the privileged speech and recognize the distinguished gentleman from Valenzuela, Senator Sherwin Gatchalian, to deliver his speech.
Our distinguished colleague from the city of Valenzuela, no other than Senator Sherwin Gatchalian, chairman of the EDCOM 2.
Thank
Please
you,
recognize.
thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. In December 2019, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development released a report from the 2018 cycle of the Program for International Student Assessment, which the Philippines joined for the first time. Headlines at the time consistently highlighted a distressing reality. The Philippines ranked lowest in reading, math, and science in the 2018 study. This ignited a collective acknowledgement of the issues within our education system. The subsequent response from Congress, culminating in the passage of Republic Act number 11899, marked the beginning of a transformative journey. A year ago today, the Second Congressional Commission on Education convened to address a pressing question. Is there truly an education crisis in our country? Moreover, beyond validation, we aim to unearth the origins and persistence of this crisis. Collaborating with the nation's foremost minds, universities, and education leaders, we sought comprehensive insights to pave the way for effective solutions. Today, I stand before you to share the initial findings of a year spent unraveling the complexities of our educational landscape. These preliminary discoveries, focusing on 12 of our 28 priority areas, result from extensive data analysis and deliberations, 19 hearings, 12 focus group discussions, and 23 site visits across the nation. As we delve deeper, we anticipate a richer understanding of the challenges we face, enabling us to craft enduring solutions. We begin where the education journey starts, in early childhood. Studies show that the Philippines has among the highest prevalence of under-5 stunting in the world. And while our laws and programs adhere to global standards, implementation has been fragmented, coverage remains low, and targeting has been weak. During the critical period of cognitive development, lack of nourishment for both the mother and the child, especially in the first 1,000 days of life, possess irreversible consequences on the child's growth, learning trajectory, and life outcomes. On early childhood education, despite RA 6972 of 1990 requiring each barangay to have at least one daycare center, access remains inequitable. A study by Philippine Institute for Development Studies show that only 36% of barangays have daycares or child development centers. Disparities are also acute. In first-class municipalities, there are up to 6 centers for every 10,000 children aged 3 to 4. In sixth-class municipalities, this number drops to only 1 to 2 centers for every 10,000 children. Another challenge, those who run these centers, the workers and teachers, lack the necessary training in early childhood education. Barely half of them have college degrees. 17% have only a high school diploma, and staggering few have formal training in ECE. Since 2005, higher education institutions nationwide offering ECE teaching program have had only 3,903 graduates, less than 4,000 graduates in almost 20 years, or barely 80 annually, a number that is hardly enough to cover the needs of our population. The vast majority of these workers and teachers also hold non-permanent positions and receive an average monthly wage of only 5,000 pesos. Worse, 19% of them, about 1 in 5, receive an honorarium of only 1,000 pesos per month. The learning crisis is just as evident in basic education. While our basic education system boasts a net enrollment rate close to 90%, the results of various international and national assessments indicate that students are not learning effectively while in school. One of the main cracks in the system is the lack of efficient and high-quality learning resources, especially textbooks. Each year, we allocate over 1 billion pesos for textbook procurement, believing that children learn best when they have access to printed materials for both structured and self-directed learning. However, EDCOM2's review reveals that over the past decade, the government has successfully procured only 27 textbook titles for grades 1 to 10 students, actually utilizing less than 1 billion pesos of the allocated 12.6 billion pesos for textbooks from fiscal year 2018 to 2022. Challenges in procurement have also affected our ability to measure the learning of our students. On paper, despite the many assessments like the National Achievement Test that are supposed to guide us in developing and adjusting interventions for the basic education sector, EDCOM's analysis show that out of the 27 key stage assessments scheduled from 2016 to 2023, 13 were administered late and 11 were not administered at all. This lack of systems-level assessment data has led stakeholders to implement additional tests, creating a system of redundant assessments with varying quality, producing results that are neither comparable nor generalizable at the national level, and ultimately burdening teachers who sacrifice instruction time to administer tests without getting meaningful results. The COVID-19 pandemic led to extended school closures, affected learning and well-being. While many countries closed schools for about 79 days, the Philippines had closures lasting over a year. Despite efforts from teachers, students, and parents to adapt to distance learning, the harm to children's learning and overall well-being has been profound. Schools are now on track to address this learning loss through the National Learning Recovery Program, but as EDCOM2 discovered in consultations, interventions such as learning camps during school year breaks may not be reaching the learners who need the remediation most due to costs associated with extending extra days in school. We must strive to make learning equitable and target support those who need it the most. Higher education paints a picture of increased enrollment but heightened dropout rates. The Commission on Higher Education data shows attrition rates were at an alarming 41% in 2020. Access also remains elusive for the economically disadvantaged. Despite budget allocation, inequities persist and the intended beneficiaries of subsidy programs deviate from their original purpose. Enrollment among the poorest students has only incrementally increased from 1.7% in 1999 to 6.1% in 2019. To further drive the point regarding inequity in access, most of those who have availed of tertiary education subsidy lie outside those whom we consider the poorest of the poor, clearly deviating from the intent of the Universal Access to Quality Education Law. In 2018, listahan and beneficiaries in the subsidy program comprised 74% of enrollees. In 2022, this share dropped to 31%, with the bulk of grantees coming from municipalities without state universities and local universities and colleges. In teacher education, disconcerting passing rates in licensure examinations persist, raising questions about the continued operation of underperforming institutions. Between 2009 to 2023, the average passing rate in the licensure examinations for elementary, which is 33%, and secondary, which is 40%, has been dismal compared to those in other professions. EDCOM also found that between 2012 and 2022, 77 HEIs offering Bachelor of Elementary Education and 105 HEIs offering Bachelor and Secondary Education continue to operate despite having consistently zero passing rates in the LET. Against this backdrop, the strengthened Teacher Education Council remains unrealized 2 years after we passed the law. During our consultations across the country, teachers consistently conveyed a recurring message. They are requesting our help, emphasizing their desire to focus on teaching rather than being assigned additional tasks. But additional tasks such as canteen management, filling up forms for the central office, and serving as 4Ps or disaster reduction, risk reduction, and management coordinators, 50 plus in all based on DepEd's inventory, pull them out of the classrooms and away from their students. While new administrative officers are being hired, 5,000 per year. Starting in 2020, this one officer is shared by multiple schools and has limited impact against the long list of ancillary and administrative tasks we have asked our teachers to take on. Some since 1925, as reported in the Monroe Survey. To compound teachers' frustrations, career advancement and professional development opportunities also remain limited. Turning our focus to technical vocational education, we saw increased participation enabled by the rise in TVET institutions and expanded subsidies and scholarship provided by the government. The majority of the enrollees, however, 3.7 million between 2014 and 2022, were in community-based training programs. Unfortunately, such programs are typically outside the purview of training regulations and thus do not lead to assessment and certification for its graduates, which are in essence the very proof of their acquired skills. In fact, TESDA's 2,203 programs, only 315 or less than 15% led to a national certification. This underscores a critical gap in aligning skills acquisition with recognized standards, hindering the advancement of our large but mostly uncertified skilled workforce. We also note the maze of policies governing enterprise-based training, with 6 different government policies and programs that have since contributed confusion on the ground. This is even more concerning considering that the majority of our skilling programs, 64%, are for NC1 and NC2 levels, which yield only incremental improvements in income to our learners after training. Industry participation remains limited and prohibitive, with many stakeholders lamenting the voluminous paperwork, rigid but obsolete requirements, and long processing times of TESDA. The resounding message is crystal clear. We must invest in higher level qualifications and dynamic demands of the labor market. This demands the bureaucratic systems evolve to be more agile to respond to the rapidly changing needs of industry. At the root of this are profound challenges in governance and finance. We found that staffing levels in education agencies have not kept pace with their growing responsibilities. For example, between 2013 to 2023, CHED's budget increased by 633%, but the agency's staffing complement only increased from 543 to 666, making the agency dependent on 752 contract of service and job order personnel. Meanwhile, TESDA's provincial offices have only 7 to 12 personnel providing a range of services, including the supervision of 17 to 88 public and private TVIS. The first EDCOM envisioned the establishment of a National Coordinating Council for Education, a high-level coordinating body to ensure synergy among DepEd, CHED, and TESDA. This vision was not achieved. On the other hand, we have 68 interagency bodies working on a broad range of concerns, such as impracticable situation yields a misalignment at the system, agency, and individual levels. And while there has been substantial growth in education funding in the past decade, the need to sustain increased investments while ensuring absorptive capacity and the strategic resourcing of what can actually support learning needs to be enhanced. We must also see these issues at school level, where during our consultations, principals have lamented that their meager school maintenance and operating expenses are easily depleted by electricity bills, in some areas consuming up to 70%. This situation is further exacerbated by inequities in the Special Education Fund. The median SEF income of municipalities is at 1.6 million pesos, or a mere 4% of the median SEF income of cities and provinces. Meanwhile, first income class municipalities have 68 times more SEF compared to the sixth income class peers. With a growing list of expenditures, among them nutrition and early childhood education being charged against the SEF, it is critical that we revisit this policy to ensure equitable resourcing so that no child is left behind. Suffice to say that these are headlines, which conclude thus: a system is defined as a regularly interacting or interdependent group of items forming a united whole. By this standard, the education system in the Philippines struggles to meet the criteria of a system. By the standards of the 1987 Constitution as well, it is short of a complete, adequate, and integrated system of education. Instead, agencies, bureaus, and offices have focused, often too faithfully, just on their respective mandates and targets, independent of one another. This is evident in the findings uncovered by the Commission in its first year. Ultimately, this has led to the miseducation or poorly delivered education of Filipino learners, bringing about a profound education crisis, as has been laid bare by both national and international assessments, issues that the Commission seeks to squarely address. The headlines we've shared offer just a glimpse into the comprehensive findings within the 400+ pages of the EDCOM's inaugural year report. Within these pages is a measured examination of the challenges permeating our schools, from the context and roots to potential pathways forward. While these ways forward seems difficult to sparse from the sheer volume of findings, it is upon us to move from piecemeal reform to a strategic and united approach that aspires to not just find short-term solutions to the challenges we have uncovered, but to ultimately build a long-term and genuine education system. This requires a shift from a mindset that looks narrowly at our own individual targets to one that understands our work is actually interdependent of each other, from plans that are perfect on paper to those that are doable in practice. As we embark on the remaining 2 years of EDCOM, our resolve is even stronger. This year, we will examine the remaining 16 priorities addressing concerns from early childhood to higher education, including issues such as the shortage in classrooms, bullying, and research productivity. That said, we are conscious that our ultimate goal is larger than resolving issues that are symptomatic of its root cause: the need to build a future-proof system of education that will not only be effective today, but is able to evolve with the needs of the future. After all, as we realized in a review of the first EDCOM report in the 1990s, most of these issues we face today have persisted for decades, often spanning multiple administrations and complicated by overlapping government policies. We carry forward the momentum gained in our first year, a momentum fueled not just by the tireless work of our advisory council and standing committee members and our colleagues in Congress, but the solidarity of all those impassioned about Philippine education. Teachers, parents, our partners in DepEd, CHED, and TESDA, as well as advocates and stakeholders at every level who remain optimistic that we can turn things around. Solidarity in various forms sustains our collective endeavor, whether in terms of openness and honesty, understanding that we seek clarity rather than placing blame, or collaboration as we navigate the intricacies of government issues that require strong political will. The foundational step towards solutions is a microscopic examination of the problem, understanding where obstacles lie in the way of genuine reform, one that we have strived to accomplish in our one-year report. This is the role of EDCOM, translating this clarity into actionable points, so together we can work towards a nation where each learner has access to quality education. And let me personally thank the members of the Senate who are part of the commission. Let me thank our majority floor leader, Senator Joel Villanueva, who has been tirelessly attending our meetings, our FGDs, Senator Sunny Angara, Senator Pia Cayetano, and also Senator Chis Escudero. Thank you, and let us work together in the remaining 2 years of our EDCOM for a brighter future for the Philippine education. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much, Senator Gatchalian. Congratulations to 1 year anniversary. You forget the guy who signs your checks. That's us.
Of course, Mr. President, we are forever grateful
Just kidding.
with
I was
your
just joking.
support to the EDCOM 2. And as part of the EDCOM 2, we'd like to convey our sincerest thanks and gratitude for all your support, Mr. President. May I just be allowed, Mr. President, to just insert into the records my short manifestation together with Senator Sunny Angara as one of the commissioners. And if Senator Pia, I think Senator Pia Cayetano, one of the commissioners of EDCOM 2, is seeking the floor. I move that she be recognized,
Yes,
Mr.
we'd
President.
like to recognize a distinguished, honorable chairperson of the Blue Ribbon Committee. History for this 106 years of the Senate. No other than 107th years of the Senate. No other than Senator Pia Cayetano is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Haba po ng introduction ninyo, but maraming salamat. Pati po dito sa likod ko, may observation pa sila sa kulay daw ng pantalon ko. Anyway, Mr. President, I join our colleague, the chairman of EDCOM, and would like to, like the majority floor leader already did earlier, acknowledge the presence of our advisory council members and standing committee members. Everyone, Mr. President, works so hard. I need to put this on record. We had more meetings than we were capable physically of attending because obviously as senators, we also had other hearings to attend to. But obviously the members also had other commitments to attend to, but I believe almost everybody was present all the time. And we do have a 300 plus page report to present through the hard work led by our executive director, Mark Caroli. Thank you so much, Mark. I was looking for you. Oh, there you are. Okay. So the details of the report of our chairman are here. These are the kind of books I love because honestly, I grew up as a childhood reader. Ito yung book na maraming picture. Okay? So I'm not embarrassed to admit that I love books with pictures, very good graphics. It's just more detailed than the exhibit outside. And the chairman gave us a summary of the 1 year findings, but I'd like to just zone in on one thing that he already mentioned. And this is because of my work as the vice chairman of the Committee on Finance in charge of the budget of DepEd. So the chairman earlier had shown slides and it is also available outside. I encourage all of you here, our guests, to take a look at it. It showed there's a whole stand there that says since 2012, only 27 textbooks have been procured for grade 1 to 10. I would like you to all visualize this, no? Many of us are parents. One of the complaints in private school parents is yung bag ng anak nila hindi na kayang kargahin. Siguro grade 1, 10 libro. So grade 2, 20 na. Grade 3, 30 na yon. So ibig sabihin, in private schools, yung 30 books na yon, covered yon in 3 years at least. And here we are, looking at the data, that only 27 textbooks have been procured for grade 1 to 10 since 2012. Digest that, Mr. President. The report, furthermore, has a very visual graphic that shows us in red are the grade levels that do not have books in various subjects. Imagine, Mr. President, grade 1, no books. In English, Araling Panlipunan. Siyempre yung picture ng staff ko malabo, so hindi ko na mabasa yung ibang subject. But suffice it to say, lahat ng subject ng grade 1, red. Walang textbook. Grade 2, red din lahat, walang textbook. So magtataka pa ba tayo kung bakit nahihirapan magbasa? Magtataka ba tayo na ang pangarap ng bawat magulang, pag nagkakonting dagdag na pera, ilipat sa private school? And yet, this does not in any way diminish the contributions of our teachers, of our superintendents, of our principals. It is a shortcoming in the system because kami naman po sa Kongreso, well, at least sa Senate, I will now only speak on behalf of the Senate, Mr. President. We have always provided for this budget. In fact, a total, and this is coming out of the report, a total of 12.6 billion has been allocated for textbooks and other instructional materials, but only 4.5 billion or 35% has been obligated. And 952 million, barely a billion, has been disbursed. Bakit? Bakit? Bakit nakaupo lang yung pera? Bakit hindi na ibibili? Now, there's so many things that we need to tackle, Mr. President. Of course, we have had these detailed discussions in EDCOM, but it is not enough. And so as I stood there in my blue pants, which have been noticed by my colleagues, Senator Angara, the chairman of finance and the chairman of EDCOM, and Majority Floor Leader had just stepped out, so I don't know if you heard this conversation. We were actually, we were talking already and they were saying, oh, baka dapat pang blue ribbon na yan. Kasi, where does the money go? Where are the books? And if it's a failure in the system, well, the money still has to be accounted for. It is a failure of delivering education to our children, Mr. President. And so, without having consulted my team, there you go. Thank you for sharing that. So, I'll just show it again once more for the public. Lahat ng red, ibig sabihin ng red, no textbook. So, if you notice, the blue is underwhelmingly in the visual, no, red talaga yung no textbook. Can you imagine grade 1 to 3 no textbook? I mean, obviously you will find some schools that have, and the reason for that, as we were also discussing, is because yung LGU nagsi-step up at ginagamit yung pondo nila. Anyway, Mr. President, I just wanted to highlight that. I wanted people to know that we have a working Senate that has been diligently looking into these issues. But gusto naman namin na we also find solutions bago naman mag-graduate ang ating chairman of the Committee on Finance, ang ating chairman of basic education. We want to be able to find solutions while kaya pa natin gamitin, no, yung input nila and yung passion nila to find to solve these problems. So there's going to be much more said and studied on all this, Mr. President, but for now I'm proud to be a member of EDCOM, and again I speak on behalf of the commissioners. We thank all the people here and not here, and even our international partners for helping us improve and really address the problems, the miseducation, the failed system of the Philippine education. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Senator.
Mr. President. I cannot agree more with the statements made by our new chairperson of the Senate Blue Ribbon Committee. Mr. President, Senator Sani Angara is also one of the commissioners of EDCOM 2. And let me say, Mr. President, yung EDCOM 1, pinangunahan ng kanyang dakilang ama, ang ating idolo, ating mentor, Senator Edgardo Angara, Mr. President. So I move that we recognize Senator Sani Angara, Mr. President.
Yes, a distinguished colleague from the province of Aurora, no other than the chairman of the Committee on Finance, Senator Sani Angara is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Leader, dear colleagues. I just want to echo the report. I want to support the report made by our very hardworking chairperson of Basic Education and the EDCOM, Senator Sherwin, as well as by our Senior Vice Chair of the Finance Committee and now first woman chair of the Blue Ribbon, Sen Pia, in their remarks earlier. Just support them and as well as their recommendations, and as well as echo their thanks to our very capable and hardworking EDCOM staff led by Carol Markey and of course his pool of experts who range from former commissioners, former and current presidents of universities, experts in various fields who really have devoted their time for no other reason than just love of country and their wish to see the next generation succeed, Mr. President. And I just want to add that thanks to our 4 commissioners, now 5 with Senator, the Minority Leader, that we have acted already on the recommendations made by EDCOM. Unlike before where we would wait for the full report until we act. But I think that there are a lot, the problems are so numerous that and so urgent. So we've, among the amendments recommended by our chair, Sen Win, who's also Vice Chair of the Finance Committee, and Sen Pia, who is the chair of the subcom on DepEd and other very important institutions. So their recommendations have been carried in the 2024 budget, which includes the certification of graduates, because one reason for the non-employment of our vocational strand graduates was the non-certification or not having the accreditation. So hindi po sila hinahire ng mga employers. Yun yung pangako natin sa mga magulang na kailangan makatapos ng additional 2 years para hindi na kailangan magkolehiyo. Walang na-hire dahil wala yung certification. That is finally now in the budget for the first time after over a decade. Mr. President, nagdagdag tayo ng pondo dun sa nutrition because of the finding that of stunting and malnutrition. There's funds for the hiring of assessors, research funds, the development of training manuals for inclusive education, for workshops for our master teachers, for a summit for the development of concept note for the local school boards, among many others, Mr. President. I just wanted to place that on record that the work of the EDCOM has been so good and outstanding that it has served as a basis and a spring for this chamber to spring into action and fund the initiatives so that this report is not just a report, but it's actually a set of reforms that has already, as we speak, is already being implemented. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Majority Leader, and thank you to our hardworking chair and commissioners.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. President, may I just put into the records that this is not actually a privileged speech. As I earlier mentioned, I spoke with our chairperson, Senator Sherwin Gatchalian. This is a report pursuant to Section 7, letter L of Republic Act number 11899, or the Second Congressional Commission on Education Act, the EDCOM 2. It states there that EDCOM 2 shall submit periodic reports to Congress. And let me also take this opportunity, once again, Mr. President, to thank our Executive Director, Carl Mark, the staff of EDCOM 2, Attorney Joseph Estrada, the EDCOM Advisory Council, and those who are present here today, specifically, Mr. President, Her Excellency HKU, Australian Ambassador to the Philippines, His Excellency Lai Tai Bin, the Vietnamese Ambassador to the Philippines, and Ms. Rebecca Eubanks and Ms. Lucelle Chen of USA. They are our Education Commission partners. And so again, we express our deepest gratitude and thanks to these individuals, Mr. President. Mr. President, may I ask for a minute suspension so to allow our guests and even the EDCOM commissioners, Mr. President, to present to you the EDCOM 2 report, Mr. President. So
Yes, before I suspend session, I'd just like to thank all our partners. You know, we in government were expected to do our job, but the partners such as the Vietnamese ambassador together with the Australian ambassador, USAID, and all the NGOs that are here supporting us, we thank you. As you can see, it's a yeoman's job trying to fill the gaps in our different social programs for our people. And any help that we can get is very welcome help indeed, particularly in the education sector. So we thank you all for your support. And of course, to the staff of EDCOM, the Secretariat, job well done on your first.
Majority Leader, I rise today on a matter of personal and collective privilege. Ginoong Pangulo, simula po noong nakamit natin ang ating kalayaan, 8 bersyon ng konstitusyon ang umiral sa ating bansa. The 1989 Malolos Constitution, the Philippine Organic Act of 1902, the Jones Law of 1916, the 1935 Constitution, the 1943 Constitution, the 1973 Constitution, the 1986 Freedom Constitution, and our present Constitution, the 1987 Constitution. Sa 8 Philippine Constitution na aking nabanggit, tanging sa 1987 Constitution lamang po natin matagpuan ang People's Initiative bilang pamamaraan para amindahan ang konstitusyon. Isa po ang People's Initiative sa mga probisyon na nagbibigay ng kapangyarihan sa mamamayan na magpasimuno ng reforma sa pamahalaan. In the words of Justice Panganiban in his separate opinion in the case of Miriam Defensor Santiago versus Comelec, and I quote, "Initiative like referendum and recall is a new and treasured feature of the Filipino constitutional system. All three are institutionalized legacies of the world-admired EDSA people power. Like elections and plebiscites, they are hallowed expressions of popular sovereignty. They are sacred democratic rights of our people to be used as their final weapons against political excesses, opportunism, inaction, oppression, and misgovernance, as well as the preserved instruments to exact transparency, accountability, and faithfulness from their chosen leaders." End of quote. I repeat, Mr. President, it is a sacred democratic right of our people to be used as their final weapons against political excesses, opportunism, inaction, oppression, and misgovernance. Ito po ang isa sa purposes ng People's Initiative as envisioned by the framers of the 1987 Constitution. Pinahahalagahan po ng saligang batas ang gampanin ng mamamayan na siguruhin na patuloy na lalamanin ng mga pahina nito ang kanilang mga interes at kapakanan. After all government authority emanates from the people. However, if the people are being misled, deceived, and coerced to sign a piece of document proposing to amend the Constitution for a certain amount of money, then the initiative is invalidated. Worse, its intentions are tarnished. The sacredness of initiative is stained by selfish motives. Ang pinagtataka po natin ngayon, bakit tila ang umiikot na so-called People's Initiative ay isang politician's initiative? Pareho pa rin silang PI, Mr. President. This is an insult and outright affront to the space duly afforded to us by the Constitution. A space intended to accommodate our people's capacity to introduce reforms. Ginoong Pangulo, mga kababayan, mayroon pong tatlong pamamaraan upang baguhin ang mga titik ng ating konstitusyon. Ang dalawa sa tatlong proseso na ito ay nangangailangan ng direktang partisipasyon ng mga halal na mga mambabatas, mga kongresista at tayong mga senador. Nag-iisa po ang pamamaraan na nakareserba para sa taong bayan para amyendahan ang saligang batas. Ito po ang tinatawag natin na People's Initiative. Bakit po kaya hindi gamitin ng mga politician na nagsusulong na Politicians Initiative ang dalawang pamamaraan na nasa konstitusyon kung gusto nilang baguhin ang ating saligang batas? Bakit hindi pa sapat sa ilang mga mamabatas na mapagkalooban ng dalawang pagpipilian para baguhin ang konstitusyon? Kailangan ba na pati ang direktang inilaan para sa ating mga mamamayan ay kukunin at gagamitin ng mga gahamang politiko? Tila Ginoong Pangulo, sa pagdaan ng mga araw, mas maraming katanungan pa ang nadadagdag kaysa mga kasagutan sa Politicians Initiative. Pero isa po ang nabigyang linaw. Mayroong mga kumikilos upang manlinlang ng ating mamamayan. Mga individual at mga grupo na tila ang tingin lamang sa pamahalaan ay isang negosyo na pwedeng pagkakitaan. Handa silang mamuhunan sa pagbili ng mga pirma o lagda. Napakadali lamang, lalo na kung hindi naman kinabukasan ng bayan ang kanilang turing dito, kundi isang tseke na maaari nilang ipalit sa salapi pagdating ng panahon. Nakalulungkot na ang pinagsamantalahan ay siyang mga kababayan natin mga walang-wala sa buhay. Sila na ang mga nagdarahop at naghihikahos. Silang mga nagugutom at walang hanap buhay. May mga pagkakataon na ilan sa ating mga kababayan na pumirma sa kadudad-dudang People's Initiative ay wala ng ibang makakapitan kundi patalim. Kapalit ng munting halaga ay pagsangla ng kaluluwa. Nakagagalit na silang mga vulnerable ang palaging target ng panlilinlang ng mga politikong may mga pansariling motibo. Nakakapanlumong isipin kung paano sinamantala ang kahirapan sa buhay ng mga mamamayan para lamang sa sariling kapakanan ng mga nasa kapangyarihan. Minsan naisip ko, Mr. President, kung nangyari ito nung bata pa ako, malamang kasama ang aking mga magulang sa mga hihikayatin nilang pumirma. At dahil mahirap lang kami, baka nga pumirma sila. Kaya ganun na lamang ang aking galit, Mr. President, sa pananamantalang ito. Pumirma ka na lang, bahala na kung hindi naintindihan, di balik, may 100 pesos ka o kaya 3,000 pesos, may panghapunan na kayo ng pamilya mo. I feel it is my obligation to stand up for the poor because I know what it is like to believe that you do not have a choice. It is my obligation to tell every single one who is listening to me right now, be it inside these halls or on some video being aired, you always have a choice. And the Senate is ready to support you in making a real, informed, dignified choice. Ginoong Pangulo, nais ko pong susugan ang pananawagan ng ating majority leader, Senator Joel Villanueva. Hinihikayat po natin ang ating mga kababayan na niluko, pinilit maging iyong mga nakatanggap ng panunuhol kapalit ang kanilang pagpirma sa isang dokumento kung saan hindi malinaw sa paglahad kung ano ang reforma na gustong iamyenda sa konstitusyon. Lumantad kayo at huwag matakot. Tulungan niyo po ang inyong senado na pananagutin ang mga nagsamantalang sa mga kahinaan. Laging bukas ang bulwagan ng senado at handang pangalagaan ang sinumang nais magsiwalat ng katotohanan at nagmamahal sa ating bayan. May kasabihan po tayo, walang manluloko kung walang magpapaloko. But you know, Mr. President, I think this saying is a case of victim blaming, lalong-lalo na sa sitwasyong ito. Sa kasalukuyang panahon, tingnan natin ito mula sa ibang perspektiba. Patawan ng parusa ang mga naluluko at huwag ipataw ang sisi sa mga inosenteng naloko. If the ill-intentioned have done their part in attempting to distort and destroy the very spirit of initiative, I implore the Senate, let us not allow such distortion to succeed. Let us take the initiative, so to speak, to protect our people from sinister motives. Protect, most especially, the ones who are unable to do it for themselves. The Senate does not and will never infringe on the right of the people to exercise the right guaranteed by the Constitution. Justice Panganiban declares that, and I quote, the right to propose amendments to the Constitution is really a species of the right of free speech and free assembly. And certainly, it would be tyrannical and despotic to stop anyone from speaking freely and persuading others to conform to her beliefs. As the eminent Voltaire once said, I may disagree with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. After all, freedom is not really for the truth we agree with, but as Justice Holmes wrote, freedom for the truth that we hate. End of quote. I would like to assure our Filipino people that the Senate, as the last bastion of democracy, does and always will support the people's clamor to institute reforms, whether this would be crafting laws or amending the Constitution itself. The Senate exists because of the people, and we will continue to push for the uplifting of the life of every Filipino. In the event that our people would come to truly believe that it is only through their own efforts that they can rewrite the letters of the Constitution to a form and content that they think embodies their ideals, I am sure that the Senate will be the first to support. However, the Senate will also be the first to condemn if the right to people's initiative is being bastardized by enterprising politicians. The Senate will not allow and will therefore condemn any form of threat, coercion, or bribery that compromises the future of our country and our people. I call on the persons behind this deceptive and fraudulent people's initiative. Make amends, not to our Constitution, but to the people, our people, whom you have maliciously enticed to unknowingly sell their future. Maraming salamat, Mr. President.
Maraming salamat, Senator Bato de la Rosa. Mabuhay ka. Very passionate speech.
Mr. President, may I be allowed to just make or pose some clarificatory questions, Mr. President? If the gentleman from Davao and Bohol would yield to some clarificatory questions, Mr. President, from this representation.
Yes, if he so wishes.
Yes, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. At the onset, Mr. President, let me state for the record my sincerest gratitude and sa Tagalog, Mr. President, yung pagsaludo sa isang senador na re-electionist ito, Mr. President. Hindi marunong matakot na gawin ang tama. Hindi marunong matakot na ipaglaban ang karapatan ng mamamayang Pilipino. Let me just put that on record, Mr. President. I salute, whether you agree with him or not, you salute, Mr. President, who is here today in this August chamber to deliver such a compelling and passionate privilege speech, Mr. President. Mr. President, ang unang katanungan ko sa ating kasama dito sa bulwagang ito, binanggit niyo po, Ginoong Pangulo, yung third mode of changing the Constitution, which is people's initiative, Mr. President. Pwede mo bang malaman natin, Ginoong Pangulo, na pag people's initiative, kailangan po ba non-partisan? Kailangan po ba hindi ginagamit ang anumang makinarya ng pamahalaan ng gobyerno? Ginagamit ang programa ng iba't ibang departamento para lamang makakalap ng pirma? Ito po ba ay natural? Sapagkat marami ho sa ating mga kababayan, Ginoong Pangulo, ang nagtatanong, ito ba ay natural na nangyayari? Hindi ho bulag ang mga Pilipino, Ginoong Pangulo. Nakita natin sa telebisyon, narinig natin sa mga radyo, na-monitor natin sa social media. Isang kababayan natin, kaya ho ako'y bilib na bilib sa ating kasamahan dito sapagkat inilagay niya yung kanyang sarili doon sa mga taong binanggit niya na parang nagkakapit patalim na lamang, Ginoong Pangulo, sapagkat tama po ba natatanggap ka ng ayuda mula sa pamahalaan, programa ng pamahalaan, pero kailangan mong pumirma sa isang dokumentong hindi mo naiintindihan? Ito po ba'y natural? Ito po ba ay People's Initiative, Mr. President, Ginoong Pangulo?
Well, Mr. President, Majority Leader, as I've said, sa nakikita natin na nangyayari ngayon, tila lumalabas na hindi naman talaga ito kagustuhan ng taong bayan. So this is not a people's initiative. This is politicians' initiative. Kung sino yung mga politiko na nasa likuran na nagpapatakbo nitong people's initiative kuno. So, very clear yan, Mr. President. At yung pangalawang sinabi mo, Mr. President, na natural ba na gamitin yung pondo ng bayan katulad ng AX, pondo ng gobyerno to entice these people to vote or to sign, to get their signature? Ay, yun po, Mr. President, ay lantarang vote buying kung tutuusin. Vote buying po talaga yan. Dahil, these people are enticed to give their signature in exchange of the money that is being offered to them through the government programs and services like AX, TUPAD, and what other programs that we have, Mr. President.
Ginoong Pangulo, ako ay humahanga sa ating kasama dito sa Senado sapagkat alam ko ho, siya ho ay taga Davao, taga Bohol, ngunit malalalim yung Tagalog na ginamit, Pilipino na ginamit ng ating kasama dito sa Senado. Natatandaan ko ho, yung binanggit niyang isang salita, naghihikahos, nagdarahop. Ginoong Pangulo, ako po, habang nakikinig ako sa ating kasamahan dito sa Senado, hindi ko mapigil kung hindi mapukaw yung silakbo ng aking dugo sapagkat binabanggit ng ating kasamahan yung pananamantala. Gaano ho ba kabigat yung ginagawang pananamantala na ating nararanasan sa ngayon, Ginoong Pangulo, na isang Pilipino, idadanggel mo yung salapi mula sa DSWD, yung pangako na ikaw ay pipirma kapalit ang ayuda ng pamahalaan, yung pangako na pipirma ka lang, makakasama ka na sa mabibigyan ng biyaya ng mga politiko kapalit ang iyong pirma. Ito ba yung insulto, Mr. President? Ito ba yung insulto sa iyo, Mr. President? Ito ba yung insulto sa ating institusyon sapagkat ang bawat isa na nagluklok sa atin bilang senador ng Republika ng Pilipinas, nung tayo po ay binoto bilang kinatawan nila as national leaders, Mr. President. Not as district representatives, not as party list representatives, but national leaders. Is this an insult, Mr. President? Is this disenfranchisement, Mr. President? Disenfranchisement of the very sacred right of every Filipino, the right to suffrage, Mr. President. May we know the thoughts of the gentleman from Davao, Mr. President?
Well, Mr. President, sa simula pa lang, talagang nakikita na natin na yung layunin nito ay iba, Mr. President. Because nobody dares to admit that they are the ones behind this so-called People's Initiative. Walang umaangkin. Pero, sa Bisaya pa, Mr. President, ako'y natingala. Ako'y nagtataka. Bakit merong lumabas na timeline na nakaprogram na doon kung anong mga courses of action, anong mangyayari in the next coming days. Pero hanggang ngayon na ayaw nilang aminin na sino talaga ang nasa likuran nito. Very clear po, Mr. President. Ako po ay may nakausap na congressman. Hindi ko lang sabihin. Sinabi niya talagang instruction yan sa aming liderato ng Kongreso. Sa mababang kapulungan. Ang instruction pa nga sa kanila is not only to get 3% of the number of registered voters in their respective congressional district, but to get at least 20%. That is according to my friend Congressman, Mr. President. So, kung yan ang ginagamit yung ating pundo ng gobyerno para makakalap ng perma, hindi lang yan insulto, Mr. President, para sa akin. Kung meron pang word na mas mabigat pa sa insulto. Kaya nga, minsan, maiisip ko, Mr. President, tila ba yung sinasabi natin na interparliamentary courtesy ay parang napapalitan na ng interparliamentary treachery. Mr. President, sa ginawa nilang yan sa atin, kung saan gusto nilang kapunin, gusto nilang tanggalan ng power ang Senado para magbigay boses sa lahat ng Pilipino. We are not only elected by a single congressional district, we are elected by the whole of the Filipino people. Gusto nilang tanggalan ng boses ang Senado by the mere subject of their people's initiative, which is voting jointly, Mr. President. Hindi lang ito insulto, Mr. President, kung isang pang-iisa, isang panlalamang, at isang, I don't know kung ano pang Tagalog na pwede kong sabihin dito. Kung Bisaya lang, Mr. President, mas marami pa akong masasabi. Pero wag na lang, hindi maintindihan ng lahat ng Pilipino yung aking sasabihin.
Mr. President, Ginoong Pangulo, as I speak before you today, Mr. President, I am hearing and seeing some news reports from leaders of the other chamber quoting this representation's name, Mr. President, na may ebidensya daw po ba, Mr. President? Ginoong Pangulo, gusto kong banggitin sa bulwagang ito, kahapon nag-launch tayo sa social media lamang, Mr. President, para sa mga lalaki at babaeng nabudol, nasamantala, at na-realize nila na sila ay niloko at ginoyo ng pekeng initiative na ito, PI din, Mr. President. After 24 hours, Mr. President, libo-libong complaints, picture ng text messages, picture ng mga aktibidades, Mr. President, ang ating nakalap. 90%, Ginoong Pangulo, 90% ng mga nagre-reklamo, sinasabi ang pangalan ng kongresista, pangalan ng mga staff ng kongresista, pangalan ng mga chiefs of staff ng kongresista. Mr. President, nagkataon lang ho ba ito? Nagkataon lang ho ba ito, Mr. President? Ang tanong ko. Sa tingin niyo po, Ginoong Pangulo, kayo po na nagsabi na meron din po kayong nakausap na ilang kongresista. Meron din po ako. Alam niyo, Ginoong Pangulo, napakasakit po para sa akin magsalita ng ganito dahil galing po tayo sa House of Representatives. Kayo, Ginoong Pangulo, Senator Risa, Senator Sunny, Senator JB, Senator Will, Senator Mark, lahat po tayo galing ng House of Representatives. Ako po, Ginoong Pangulo, wala akong Joel Villanueva kung walang House of Representatives. Lahat po ng natutunan ko, paano ako makakapag-contribute for nation building, natutunan ko sa House of Representatives. Kaya masakit po sa akin, Ginoong Pangulo, ang makita 90% ng reklamo, House of Representatives. Nagtataon ho ba ito, Ginoong Pangulo? Pagsasalita na po ako, yung alam ko ho, personal, hindi lang yung sinumbong sa akin na sinasabi kong 90%. Sa aking lalawigan, ito yung pinakamasakit. Lalawigang tinubuan ko, Mr. President. 20 taon mahigit ang hinintay bago nagkaroon ng representante ang dakilang lalawigan ng Bulacan dito sa bulwagang ito. Tapos may ganito, Mr. President. Nakausap ko yung mga konsehal, nakausap ko yung mga kapitan, nakausap ko pati toda, Mr. President, na ginamit ng mga kongresista doon. Doon nga po sa Hagunoy, pinapirma sila. Sa Hagunoy, Bulacan, hindi alam kung ano yung pinipirmahan. Meron pang iba, sabi, online game lang. Nanalo kang 300 pesos, i-Gcash sa'yo. Bigay mo lang yung telepono mo. Nandito po. At hindi kagaya noong mga nagpalabas ng TV ad at nagpupush ng peking inisyatibo na ito, hindi nila mapinpoint kung sino sila. Handa po ako ibigay ito. Handa akong sabihin kung sino itong mga ito. Ipakita itong mga ebidensya na ito, Mr. President. I'm just wondering, Mr. President, bakit ganito? Nakita ko po si Senator Cynthia Villar, galing din po sa House of Representatives. Bakit ganito, Ginoong Pangulo? Hindi ho ba pagpapalit ng kalye, pangalan ng kalye dito sa Pilipinas? Pag pinapalitan po ang kalye, pangalan ng kalye. Ginoong Pangulo, matanong ko po ang ating distinguished colleague. Pag pinapalitan po ba ang kalye, pangalan ng kalye dito sa Pilipinas, pagkatapos po bang maipasa sa House of Representatives, batas na po ito, palitan na ang kalye?
Hindi pa, mga Ginoong Pangulo.
May Senado pa.
Dadaan pa yan sa Senado.
Pagkatapos may bycam. Mr. President, hindi pangalan ng kalye ang pinapalitan. Kaluluwa ng bayan natin ang pinapalitan. Na for almost 40 years, hindi ginagalaw. Na for almost 40 years, hindi basta-basta pinakikialaman. Bakit? Kaluluwa ng bayan to. Now you see, with your own eyes, on television, now you hear the complaints of the people. And I will use and borrow the words of Senator Bato de la Rosa, yung mga nagdarahop, yung mga naghihikahos, mga nangangailangan ng tulong, nangangailangan ng ayuda ng gobyerno, umaasa sa tulong ng gobyerno, pagsasamantalahan natin para lamang ma-extend ang termino natin, para lamang ma-abolish ang Senado. Mr. President, kung gusto ng taong bayang i-abolish ang Senado, I don't mind. If it is the will of the people, I don't mind. Ano mang klaseng gusto ng ating mga kababayan, dalhin man ang ating bayan sa kangkungan, dalhin man ang ating bayan sa impyerno, kung yan ang gusto ng taong bayan, susunod tayo. Re-respetuhin natin. Pero Mr. President, Ginoong Pangulo, kung ayuda ng gobyerno, ipagkakait mo. Kung hindi ka pipirma,
Hindi ka makatanggap.
hindi ka makakatanggap. At ano ito? Katang-isip ni Senator Bato de la Rosa? Katang-isip ni Joel Villanueva? Bakit hindi natin tanungin ang bayan? Bakit hindi natin tanungin si Juan de la Cruz? Ito ba ay People's Initiative? Mr. President, I can go on and on, but I just wanted to also ask our dear colleague, where do we go from here, Mr. President? How do you want this privileged speech, Mr. President? Pagkatapos nating i-refer, and I suppose, if I may, mamaya ay i-refer ito dun sa committee ni Senator Amy Marcos ng Committee on Electoral Reforms and People's Participation. Ano yung pwede nating magawa dito, Mr. President? Ngayon na pagkatapos ng meeting ng ating pinuno ng Senado at ng pinuno ng Kamara de Representantes na tayo po'y nagsunog ng kilay para ayusin at siguruhin yung mga gusto kuno ng ating mga kausap na marami din naman sa atin pabor doon sa economic provisions. Kaya nga po natin pinasa yung Public Services Act. 5 sektor lang yung hindi natin pinagalaw na magkaroon ng 100% ownership, Mr. President. Ngayon, Mr. President, where do we go from here? Kailangan pa ba nating ispilingin yan, Mr. President? Kailangan pa bang i-memorize yan kung seryoso yung ating mga kausap, Mr. President? Sa pagpapasa nitong joint resolution na ito? That's my question, Mr. President.
Well, Mr. President, if I may add, kanina, nag-start yung aking investigation on the alleged scam, ayuda scam na nangyayari sa Davao del Norte. At kami doon, lahat na nandun na senador, ay akala namin, yun ang pinaka-the worst na nangyari. Yung 10,000 na ayuda na binigay, ay binawi yung 9,000 at 1,000 lang ay binigay sa ating mga kababayan na pumirma. So, out of 10,000, 9,000 binulsa ng mga nag-recruit sa kanila at ang 1,000 ay binigay sa kanila. Akala ko, the worst na yun na pangyayari. Pero if I am going to borrow the words of our majority leader, hindi lang 9,000 ang katumbas ng ginagawa ngayon ng People's Initiative, kundi kaluluwa ng ating bayan ang kapalit ng perma ng ating mga kababayan. So dapat ang Senado ay hindi matutulog. I implore all our colleagues, huwag nating hayaan ito. Magtutulungan tayo dito. Hindi natin papayagan na masisira itong ating bansa dahil lang sa kagustuhan ng ilang mga politiko na gustong mag-perpetuate in power, Mr. President.
Thank you. With the permission of the majority floor,
Mr. President.
yung kaninang binanggit mo, Senator Bato, ang 10,000, kinupit ang 9,000, kinuha, o kinupit o ninakaw, binawi yung 9,000 at naiwan yung 1,000.
Yes,
At
Mr.
para yan pumirma sa People's Initiative.
Hindi yun, Mr. President. Iba yun.
Iba yun.
Iba.
Kasi dalawang krimen, kung yan ang nangyari, dalawang krimen ang nangyari doon. So, ang sinasabi mo, ito ay ayuda lamang.
Ayuda lamang. Ayuda lamang. Ang comparison lang na pinapakita ko is that yung katumbas ng perma nila ay 9,000 na napunta sa korupsyon. Pero itong ginagawang People's Initiative, ang katumbas ng kanilang perma ay kinabukasan ng ating bayan. That is immeasurable. Ang value po niyan ay hindi po ma-quantify, Mr. President. So, napakahirap po i-reconcile ito mga latest na pangyayari sa ating bansa, Ginoong Pangulo.
Thank you.
Mr. President, I also ask the gentleman from Davao and Bohol, where do we go from here, Mr. President? May mga COMELEC officials na po sa ilang parte ng ating bansa, whether district or regional, na tumatanggap nitong mga peking firma na pinagsamantalahan, firma na nagoyo yung pumirma, Mr. President. Where do we go from here, Mr. President? Ano bang accountability, Ginoong Pangulo, ng ating mga opisyales ng COMELEC para tignan ito? Kasi meron po isang nagsasabi sa isang artikulo na ang tanging mandato lamang ng COMELEC ay tumanggap ng pirma. Hindi na po nila iniimbestigahan ito. Meron naman nagsasabing pwedeng mag-imbestiga. Ngunit sa aking pagkakaalam, Mr. President, matagal-tagal na rin po tayo dito sa mundo ng lehislatura, Mr. President. As I mentioned, I was a term member of the House and this is my second term here in the Senate. Hindi naman po ganun talaga makapag-imbestiga ang COMELEC sa mga ganitong gawain, Mr. President. So, what can we do, Mr. President?
I think, Mr. President, right now, we cannot stop COMELEC from accepting all the signatures being submitted to them because it is their duty to receive all those signatures. But doon na lang natin sila sisingilin, Mr. President, sa kanilang function sa pag-verify. Yung verification nila, dapat ito ay gagawin nila ng totoo at may halong konsensya, Mr. President. Sana may konsensya sila sa kanilang gagawing verification later on, Mr. President.
Perhaps, Mr. President, I would encourage my distinguished colleague, Senator Bato, to look into this specific law, if there is any, Mr. President, to not just ministerially accept all these signatures despite the fact that they are very much aware of what is happening. In fact, Mr. President, just today, I made an announcement that because just like our dear colleague, hindi ko humasikmura ito, Mr. President. Hindi ko humasikmura talaga. Ako'y mag-retire na after my term here in the Senate, Mr. President. And hindi ko lang humasikmura itong ginagawang paglapastangan sa payak na karapatan ng ating mga kababayan. Lalong-lalo na sa pagpapalit ng ating konstitusyon. If there's one word to describe what's happening right now, Mr. President, nakakasalukasok. Nakakasalukasok itong ginagawang ito, Mr. President. Mr. President, this is bigger than us, bigger than you and me, bigger than all of us, bigger than this institution. When you talk about the Constitution of the Republic of the Philippines. Mr. President, perhaps we can do something about it. Kung alam natin na may problema, at gaya ng nabanggit ko, Mr. President, ako mismo ay willing na spearhead yung pong pagbawi ng pirma ng ating mga kababayan. Kaya sa mga nanonood po sa atin, live streaming sa Facebook o kung saan man, inaanyayahan ko po kayo, gaya ng binanggit kanina ni Senator Bato, magsumbong po kayo. Aalalayan po namin kayo. All you need to do is magkaroon ho kayo ng affidavit. Gagawa ho namin kayo ng form. Punta lang ho kayo sa inyong lokal na COMELEC office sa inyong lugar. At sabihin ang nangyari at binabawi ninyo ang inyong pirma. Kasi ako, sa aking experience, Mr. President, doon ho sa aming lalawigan, lalo na sa aming distrito, nakakalungkot po yung nangyari sa aming distrito. Wala ho akong nakausap ni isa. Ako'y gagalangin ko ho, Mr. President, Senator Bato de la Rosa, gagalangin ko po yung aking kababayan na magsabi sa akin, gusto ko itong pagpapalit ng ating konstitusyon, gusto kong revisahin, gusto kong tignan. Gusto kong i-review. Gusto kong magkaroon ng unicameral form of government. Gusto kong buwagin ng Senado. Gagalangin ko po Actually, gagalangin ko po. Wala ho akong problema doon. Pero sa aming distrito, wala pa ho akong nakausap ni isa na naiintindihan yung kanyang pinirmahan. Ni isa na nagsabing pinapirma siya at in-explain kung ano nga ba itong People's Initiative na voting jointly ang Kamara at Senado. Na ang Speaker o ang Senate President, in the end, Mr. President, Speaker or Senate President may call to convene a Constituent Assembly. Wala ho akong narinig na gano'n. Ulitin ko po, Mr. President, gagalangin ko. Kung yun ay bukal sa loob ng aking kababayan, sino man po sila, nasaan man po sila. Pero ulitin ko po, sa aming distrito, wala pa ho akong nakausap.
Well, Mr. President, the mere fact na ito'y ginawa nila while we are on break. Nasa Christmas vacation tayo, nagkakaroon sila ng blitzkrieg attack. Mr. President, how do you qualify that kind of situation? Naka-break tayo, bigla na lang, lumabas ito ngayon, at wala na. We're caught off guard.
Are you saying there's bad faith, Mr. President?
Well, I presume there is bad faith. Dahil pwede namang sabihin sa atin, prangkahin tayo, na gusto namin ito. Kung meron silang respeto sa atin, pwede naman lang sabihin na gusto namin ito, introduce namin ito, sa ayaw nyo sa gusto, we will go for it. Pero huwag naman yung patalikod, Mr. President, mabulaga na lang tayo habang tayo nasa vacation. Ganun na lang.
What about the result of our caucus, Mr. President? Tayo ay nag-caucus, if you recall, Mr. President, para pag-usapan itong joint resolution na supposed to be ay ating tatalakayin ngayong mga panahon na ito, ngayong araw na ito, Mr. President. What do you think would happen to this, Mr. President, after knowing na parang may bad faith, Mr. President?
Well, Mr. President, hanggang ngayon, ako po'y tuliro. Anong gagawin natin? So I leave it up to the leadership of the Senate at pag-usapan po natin yan para magkakaroon tayo ng united stand on this particular issue. I leave it up to I am a good soldier. I will follow our Senate President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Diyan po nagwawakas ang aking maikling interpellation sa ating kasama dito sa Senado. Muli, taus-puso akong nagpapasalamat at sumasaludo sa ating kasama sa Senado, Senator Bato de la Rosa, na hindi natatakot banggitin ang katotohanan sapagkat ngayong araw na ito ginugunita natin ang Malolos Congress. At ang nakakatuwa po, Ginoong Pangulo, sa mga delegado ng Malolos Congress, mayroon po silang isang salita. Matatayuan natin ang paninindigan ng ating mga framers ng Malolos Congress. At gaya ng ating kasamahan dito sa Senado, Senator Bato de la Rosa, nais kong ilagay sa talaan ng bulwagang ito na hindi po tayo papasindak, na hindi po tayo titiklop sa anumang uri ng atake. Hindi lamang sa institusyong ito, hindi lamang sa ating mga sarili, kundi atake sa karapatan ng bawat mamamayang Pilipino. Maraming salamat, Ginoong Pangulo. Maraming salamat, Senator Bato de la Rosa.
Maraming salamat, Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Pre-
Hangang-hanga din po ako sa ating mahal na kaibigan, kababayan, taga Mindanao, Senator Bato de la Rosa is slowly becoming a statesman of the Senate. And he's no longer looking at local politics or petty issues. He's now taking up the challenges of our institution. And I salute him for that. Maraming salamat, sir.
Mr. President, Senator Robin Hood Padilla is also seeking the floor. I move that he be recognized.
Ang ating kapatid, Senator Robin Hood Padilla is recognized.
Maraming salamat po, Ginoong Pangulo, at sa ating pinunong mayorya. Gusto ko lamang pong sundan ang napakagandang talumpati ni Senator Bato de la Rosa. Ganun din po ang iminungkahi at ibinato ng ating pinunong mayorya patungkol po sa People's Initiative. Bilang ako po ay chairman ng Committee ng Amendments and Revision, nais ko pong ipaalam sa inyo, Ginoong Pangulo, na ako po mismo ay may sarili ding People's Initiative. Yan po ay aking isinusulong at nais ko pong ipaalam sa lahat na wala pong sa konstitusyon natin, Article 17, napakaliwanag, na meron po talagang tatlong moda. At yan ang Constitutional Assembly, CONCON, at People's Initiative. Ang nais ko lamang pong linawin, mahal na Ginoong Pangulo, na wala pong masama sa People's Initiative. Wala. Yan po ay kasama sa konstitusyon at yan po ay pinalalakas. Katulad po ng sinabi ni Senator Bato de la Rosa, ito po ay esensya ng ating demokrasya. Ang nagkakaroon lamang po ng hindi naaayon sa saligang batas na umiiral sa atin ngayon ng 1987 Constitution, malinaw po doon sa Article 6 din ang legislative body, ang paghihiwalay ng Senado at ng House of Representatives. Ang magkahiwalay na kapangyarihan, lalong-lalo na sa tinatawag nating voting powers. Nagkaroon lamang po tayo ng pagkakataon na maging suliranin yung voting sapagkat doon sa Article 17, hindi malinaw na naisulat. Pero doon sa Article 6, Section 21, kung hindi po ako nagkakamali, in time of war, malinaw po doon na ang Senado at ang House ay meron silang magkasamang pagpupulong at sila ay boboto separately. Napakalinaw po nun. Hindi lang po natin maintindihan kung bakit nagkaroon ng People's Initiative na ipinipilit ang voting jointly. Ang pag-uusapan natin ay saligang batas. ito po ay talagang kailangan po nating pag-usapan ng mahaba, kasama po ang malaking kapulungan, ang House. Hindi po ito para po sa akin pong ibinigay niyong komite, pinag-aralan ko po ito, ang ating konstitusyon. Ito pong voting jointly ay lumalabag sa artikulo ng legislative body sapagkat meron pong paghihiwalay ng kapangyarihan. At diyan pong kapangyarihan na yung voting, kasama po yan. At malinaw sa ating konstitusyon. Kaya mahal na Ginoong Pangulo, hayaan niyo po akong makapagpasalamat sa bumubuo ng ating Senado at inyo pong ipinaglalaban yung ating kapangyarihan na magkaroon ng voting separately. Sapagkat ito po ang sinasabi ng 1987 Constitution. At ang People's Initiative po ay ang pwede lang po natin gawin lamang ay amendment. Hindi po tayo pwedeng mag-revision ng konstitusyon na gagamitin ang People's Initiative. Sapagkat piecemeal lang ang pwede natin gawin. Amendment lang, hindi po revision. Kaya po sana maging malinaw po ito sa ating taong bayan na ang ating pong winawaksi dito ngayon sa ating bulwakan ng Senado ay yung sinasabing pagtatanggal ng kapangyarihan sa Senado. Yun po ay talagang parang isinawalang bahala na natin ang saligang batas. Kailangan po tindigan natin ang saligang batas sapagkat tayo po ay nanumpa sa harap ng saligang batas. At yun lamang po, mahal na Pangulo, maraming salamat po. Mabuhay ang Senado.
Maraming salamat, Senator Robin Hood Padilla. Ako humanganga din po sa inyo. Alam ko, ang inyong advocacy is to amend the charter to improve the constitution ng ating bansa. At pumirma po kayo dito dahil sa puntong iyon na binanggit mo, na dahil ayaw po makapon ng Senado, ayaw nyo pong walang saysay ang Senado dito sa usaping charter change. Kaya mabuhay po kayo, Senator. Marami po sa amin ay naniniwala din po sa inyo na dapat meron tayong mga kailangan baguhin, pero sa tamang paraan. Maraming salamat. Majority President.
Yes, Mr. President. Next to make a manifestation is our Minority Leader, Senator Coco Pimentel. I move that he be recognized.
Our distinguished Minority Floor Leader, former Senate President of this August Chamber, this institution that has lasted for 107 years, no other than Senator Coco Pimentel.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Ano lang po, maikling inputs kasi meron pa tayong gagawing caucus. I think a colleague will also share his thoughts with us. Well, kanina po sa exchanges for dialogue nila Majority Leader at saka ni Senator Bato de la Rosa, nag-raise ng tanong si Majority Leader, ano ang pwedeng gawin? Sa tingin ko marami tayong pwedeng gawin. Siguro panawagan natin sa ating mga kababayan, yung mga hindi pa nakapirma, huwag kayong pumirma rito sa iniikot na People's Initiative kasi tagong-tago po yung agenda, nakatago sa mga mabibigat at magagandang salita na tungkol sa procedure sa pag-amenda ng Constitution. Hindi po yan ang unod o hindi yan yung substance ng plano. Parang chess po ito, pero madali lang din basahin. Mga 2 to 3 moves ahead lang po. Kita na po natin ano po ang agenda po nila. Kaya pinapakiusap natin. Tapos si Majority Leader ay nag-launch na naman ng kanyang online movement na doon naman sa mga nakapirma, pwede po silang mag-manifest na nung kami napapirma, hindi naman niya napaliwanag sa amin ng totoo, ng mabuti, or kami naabutan ng isang bagay na may halaga, bawal po yun, na pera man or isang bagay na may halaga, or napangakuan na may darating na bagay na may halaga in the future. So, posible pong gawin po nila yon. Tapos, siguro na lang, for the consideration of Senator Bato, ang aking opinion is actually meron na pong justiciable controversy. Hindi na po natin kailangan hintayin na yung formal petition kung lalantad na yung mga tao nasa likod nito. Mag-file kasi yan ng petition sa COMELEC. Sa aking palagay, meron na pong justiciable controversy ngayon at yung mga interesado dito sa issue na to, pwede na tayong mag-meeting as on this legal matter kasi tinatanggap ng COMELEC Tinatanggap ng COMELEC yung binibigay ng mga papel na may pirma. So therefore, COMELEC is following a certain procedure. Ang sabi nila may resolution sila. But COMELEC cannot give power unto itself. Therefore, there must have been a law authorizing the COMELEC to receive these signatures and to follow a certain procedure pursuant to the resolution na pinromulgate po ng COMELEC. Kung parehas ang law na iniisip natin, itong law po na ito kalimutan ko lang po yung RA number. Ano? Itong Republic Act number na ito, 6735, ay naging subject matter na ng isang kaso, yung nabanggit na rin po, nabanggit yata ni Senator De La Rosa, the defensor case versus Comelec. At ang conclusion ng Supreme Court doon, that law is insufficient to support a people's initiative. That is in an extended decision. Alam ko na po yung sagot ng whoever, kung sino man yung nasa likod nito, na hindi pa naman klaro kung sino. Parang chess ba ito? Na-anticipate na natin yung next move nila. Sasabihin nila, meron daw second case na yung sa Lambino case, yung the original firma case, na meron daw so-called minute resolution ng Supreme Court on the resolution sa MR, kasi natalo naman yung firma nun eh. Pero nag-motion for reconsideration yung mga natalo. Hindi rin sila nanalo sa motion for reconsideration, pero sa minute resolution, yan yung mga yun yung mga maiikling mga iikling mga order ng korte. Pero last paragraph doon na sinabi na 10 members of the court are of the opinion that RA 6735 is sufficient to support the people's initiative. Yun po yung counter nila sa ating action. Pero alam na rin po natin yung counter argument po natin doon na ang minute resolution does not form part of the laws of the land under the Civil Code. Kasi sa Civil Code, decisions of the Supreme Court form part of the laws of the land. Decisions of the Supreme Court. The Miriam Defensor versus Comelec case is a decision. Okay. Ibabangga ng mga proponents nito is a mere minute resolution. Walang signature ng justices po doon. Clerk of the division. Okay. So, and then, can a decision of a division in a minute resolution overturn a decision of the Supreme Court even if rendered by a division? Hindi. Basic na basic sa Constitution yun. If you reverse something in bank. So, I think we already have a justiciable controversy here and we can act. So we can act, kung makita pa natin, we can act politically by calling on the people to not to sign. And for those who have signed, to withdraw their signature. We can act legally, in the sense of filing cases to already question what the Comelec is doing. What is your business receiving all these papers with signatures? At sinasabi nila, they have a ministerial role to play as of the moment. Based on what? On a law already characterized by the Supreme Court as insufficient to support a people's initiative. At saka, Mr. President, as well, since actually itong people's initiative ngayon is an improvement dun sa PIRMA case na sinabi ko. Kasi yung sa PIRMA case before, signatures lang ang sinabit, wala yung, hindi naka-reflect po ano yung amendment. Okay. In this particular case, naka-reflect ng amendment. Okay. Pero dahil sa naka-reflect ng amendment, alam na natin yung subject matter. Although yung pagdating sa number of sections affected, iisa lamang, pwedeng sabihin na amendment ito, pero hindi yan ang definition ng amendment. Kung ang pagbabago ay magsasanga-sanga, apektado ang iba-ibang sections ng Constitution, ang konsepto ng bicameral Congress ay apektado, therefore it is not a mere amendment, it is already a revision. Because yung basic structure ng legislative branch ang binabago or kinukontra yung konsepto ng basic structure ng legislative branch. Hence, if it is not an amendment, then it must be a revision. And people's initiative is not available for a revision. So, these are our arguments, Mr. President. So, sa tanong na what can be done, marami ang pwedeng gawin. I'm sure hindi ko na-exhaust yung pwedeng gawin. That's why we're continuing with our caucuses. Baka meron pa tayong ibang mga ideas na lalabas. So without prejudice to further elaboration in some other future speeches, Mr. President, I will end my intervention for today.
Thank you very much to our Minority Floor Leader. Your experience in law and being a bar top-notcher will help us immensely in these cases that we'll be filing. And we'll be filing this together. So maybe stand or adjourn.
We still have one manifestation. Actually, two.
Sir, for the
Our Deputy Minority Leader, Senator Ray Santiveros.
I'm sorry. Our Deputy Minority Floor Leaders recognized. My apologies, ma'am. My apologies.
Walang problema, ug salamat kaayo, Mr. President. Joining in the spirit of the privileged speech,
of the good gentleman from Davao and Maynista. For the record, Mr. President, a point that I just wish to reiterate sa ating diskusyon ngayong hapon, hindi tsatsa ang lunas sa mga totoong problema ng mga Pilipino ngayon. Klaro ang daing ng taong bayan. Patuloy na pagtaas sa presyo ng bilihin, kakulangan ng trabaho at kita ng manggagawa, sirang sistema ng pampublikong transportasyon at isang pamahalaan na tila walang pananagutan at tugon sa mga totoo nilang pangangailangan. Mandato ng saligang batas na gawing prioridad ng gobyerno ang pagpuksa sa kahirapan, paglaban sa di pagkakapantay-pantay sa lipunan, pagprotekta sa karapatan ng manggagawa, at paniniguro na lahat ng Pilipino ay may oportunidad na pagandahin ang ating buhay. Ang solusyon dito, tapat na pamamahala at pagsasabuhay sa mga mandato ng 1987 Constitution. Hindi ang pagwawaksi nito para sa pansariling interes. So, that additional point for the record, Mr. President, og saliwat, salamat kaayo sa good gentleman.
Thank you very much to our distinguished colleague, Senator Rizal de Ferros.
Thank you, Mr. President. Last to make a manifestation in this matter is this representation. I move that I be recognized. Mr.
Yes, our distinguished Deputy Majority Floor Leader is recognized.
Mr. President, my dear colleagues, I share the frustrations of my colleagues in the Senate and the public towards the ongoing People's Initiative. To be clear, I'm not against changing the Constitution per se. I'm open to charter change, especially for the economic provision, for its potential to spur economic development. We are playing catch-up with our ASEAN neighbors. Our priority should be to go full steam ahead on infrastructure development and energy, and in order to make the Philippines competitive and attractive. I believe charter change on economic provisions can help us in this regard. However, we cannot negotiate in bad faith. We cannot play around with the democratic process as important as changing the highest law of the land. And this is how we regard the ongoing petition for People's Initiative. Earlier on, we reached a consensus that we will set aside this type of political circus and instead focus on ensuring that our economic recovery. Nasaan ang palabra de honor? Nasaan ang prioridad natin para sa bayan? Mr. President, the political noise and partisan bickering that will result from this process will only stall our economic recovery. All our efforts in recovering from the pandemic and building a better economy will be for naught if we allow these protracted political squabbles to continue. Charter change will definitely consume much of our time here in the Senate. We will waste our time arguing over voting procedures and other aspects of this political exercise. Marami tayong mga suliranin at hamon na kailangan gawa ng solusyon at bigyan ng pansin. And many of these can be solved without tinkering with the Constitution at this time. Let us do the people's work. Let us work for modernizing our infrastructure and energy, ensuring food security, and revitalizing our economy. All our time, energy, and resources should be focused on these important issues rather than wasting them in a political exercise that will only divide and worse, stall our efforts to ensure a prosperous future for people. Mr. President, nakaka-frustrate. Ang dami nating hinabol ng priority bills. Measures that are intended to set as our framework and direction towards recovery and making our country competitive once again. Parang lahat ng ating pinagpaguran, pinagpuyatan, ito man nakaraang buwan ay masasayang. This activity will definitely stall all of these efforts. Nakakapanghinayang. Definitely itong charter change, itong usapin na ito, sabi ko nga po, ito 2 araw na tayo halos. Hindi nakausad. Because of this, talking about this issue, nakakapanghinayang. It's frustrating for me, Mr. President. Personally, I was requested by the economic team to defend the public-private partnership, which was not under my committee. I took the challenge because I wanted to help this administration. Kaya lang parang sayang ang lahat kung ito po ipapasok ngayon. Bakit pa tayo nagpagod? Bakit pa tayo nag-aral? Bakit pa tayo nagpuyat para lamang maipasa ang mga ito? Kung ganito rin lang po ang kahinatnan. I'm just sharing with you my frustration because all of us exerted all our efforts here in the Senate. Dito po talagang tayo nag-aaral para lamang may ayos ang lahat ng mga panukala at maging batas na mag-aayos ng ating pumbayan. There is time for everything, Mr. President. Now is not the time for divisive activity like the People's Initiative. So with that, Mr. President, I move that we refer the privileged speech of Senator De La Rosa and all the interpellation and manifestations thereon to the Committee on Electoral Reforms and People's Participation. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motion is approved. And I'd like to add, I'd like to share the frustration of the distinguished colleague, Senator J.V. Ercito. Ang aga-aga pa lang ng administrasyon na to, bakit ang dami-dami ng away? I think we should concentrate on moving forward with the economic agenda for the upliftment of poverty of each and every Filipino that's living in abject poverty, 25%. Minimum wage, tulak natin. May rally kanina. Imbis na charter change, pwede bang taas natin ang sweldo? Pasok natin yan. Pasa
Ay ng presyo ng bilihin.
Correct. So I think, my dear colleagues, today has been a very fruitful day for the institution. I think our standing as one in this chamber, not just for our own self-preservation. It's not about self-preservation. It's about looking at the 107 years of history of this hallowed ground, these hallowed halls of the Senate. Nakita natin yung mga personalities na ipinaglaban, the father of Senator Coco Pimentel, who fought against injustice and the martial law days, and many others who were jailed and fought for what they believed in and lost their power, fighting for our country and for our nation and for our democratic processes. Huwag natin sampalin sila, na makalimutan natin ng kanilang alaala, kanilang memories. No, we forget their memories because of pure personal ambition. That's why I salute all of you. I salute all of you. It is now a test of character. This, gentleman, is a test of character. Separates the boys from the men. Those who want the toys and those who want to fight for our country. So kayong lahat, mabuhay po kayo. So yesterday, my dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, may I ask them to please first calm down and take your seats and settle down there in the back. We'll be discussing very important matters. Thank you, my dear colleagues. My dear friends, ating mga kababayan, my dear colleagues, yesterday we had a caucus which lasted 3 hours long to discuss the current events that are happening in Philippine politics, particularly on the issue of this People's Initiative. If I may be allowed to read the statement of the Senate on the People's Initiative. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land. It is an enduring symbol of our democracy, enshrining the foundation of our nationhood and reflecting the consensus of our citizenry. We respect and recognize the people as our sovereign, with the right to call for constitutional amendments. We must, however, guard against any sinister and underhanded attempt to change the Constitution by exploiting our democratic process under the guise of a People's Initiative. This so-called People's Initiative proposes only one change. In acting as a constituent assembly, the Senate and the House shall vote jointly. While it seems simple, my dear friends, the goal is apparent: to make it easier to revise the Constitution by eliminating the Senate from the equation. It is an obvious prelude to further amendments, revisions, or even an overhaul of our entire Constitution. If this PI prospers, further changes to the Constitution can be done with or without the Senate's approval, or worse, even absent all the senators. Should Congress vote jointly in a constituent assembly, the Senate, with its 24 members, cannot cast any meaningful vote against 316 members of the House of Representatives. This singular and seemingly innocuous change in the Constitution will open the floodgates to a wave of amendments and revisions that will erode the nation as we know it. To allow joint voting will destroy the delicate balance between which our hard-won democracy rests. It will change, or destabilize rather, the principle of bicameralism in our system of checks and balances. With this change, the Senate is left powerless to stop even the most radical of proposals. We cannot protect our lands from foreign ownership. We cannot stop the removal of term limits nor no election scenario in 2025 or worse, in 2028. It is ridiculous that the Senate, as a co-equal chamber of the House, which is needed to pass even local bills, will have a dispensable and diluted role in charter change, the most monumental act of policymaking concerning the highest law of the land. Throughout Philippine history, the Senate has always been one of the first targets by those who seek to undermine our country's democracy. Today, the Senate once again stands as a bastion of democracy, as it rejects this brazen attempt to violate the Constitution, the country, and our people. This Senate of the people will not allow itself to be silenced. Signed, yours truly, Senate President Juan Miguel Zubiri, Senate President Pro Temp Lauren Legarda, Senate Majority Floor Leader Joel Villanueva, Minority Floor Leader Senator Calino Coco Pimentel, Senators Joseph Victor Ejercito, Mark Villar, Lisa Hontiveros, Sunny Angara, Maria Lourdes Nancy Binay, Alan Peter Cayetano, Pia Cayetano, Ronald Pato de la Rosa, Francis G. Escudero, Jingoy Estrada, Sherwin Gatchalian, Christopher Lawrence Go, Manuel Lito Lapid, Aimee Romualdez Marcos, Grace Po, Bong Revilla, Francis Tol Tolentino, Rafi Tulfo, Cynthia Villar, and last but not the least, my dear colleague and friend and advocate for charter change, Robin Hood Padilla. And I'd like to add in the signature of Robin Padilla that he is for constitutional change, but like all of us, he refuses to allow voting jointly. It should be voted separately. This is the statement that the Senate has made. We are proud of this statement. We stand by our institution, not for our own personal benefit or gain, as I mentioned earlier during the Malolos Congress's 125th anniversary, but for the systems of checks and balances and democracy as a whole. We must stand fast. These attacks on our democratic principles. Sumabuhay ang Senado. I ask for a minute suspension to ask my colleagues to join me in the podium for this historic photo opportunity.
Ito lang tayo mga tol. Maraming salamat sa panonood at patuloy na suporta. God bless you sa inyo lahat at hanggang sa muli. Paalam.